Good evening. I'd like to call the November 9th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Could we have the roll, please?
Ms. Dean? Here. Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Spring?
Here.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Cange?
Present.
Mr. Spinelli? Thank you. Mr. Strike and Mr. Sporhays have been excused. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to move an agenda item around. I move that we move item E1 and place that after we finish public hearings on cases G1 and G2.
Okay. Can I get a second? Can I get a second to move the UMed district plan? Thank you. It's moved and seconded. Any opposition? The agenda is reordered. Could I have a motion for the minutes, please, of October 12th? Any discussion? Those minutes are approved. Disclosures. Mr. Spring.
I have no disclosures to make.
Mr. Walker.
Only that there are some instances in the response grid for, I don't know, use the case number here. Well, for the UMed district plan, so it'd be case 2015-0036, where Providence Hospital or Providence Alaska Medical Group and their real estate department made some comments and the staff disagreed. I should disclose that I represent Providence and just get that on the table, I suppose.
Can I ask in what manner you represent Providence?
I represent the marketing of the Tudor Square retail property, which is one of the areas that was discussed on the land use plan map. Staff did agree with Providence's stance on how that particular property should be treated, but there were others near it that they disagreed on. So.
Okay. Ask a question of staff. Obviously, there are a lot of issues in a long-range plan. In this instance, it appears that, if there were specific issues that were suggesting Providence have a significant change in the use, would there ever be an instance where a commissioner would have a conflict on the entire plan or even a portion of the plan?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure there's a lot of, I'm not sure this issue has come up a lot in the past. It does seem to me possible that people in the real estate profession who are representing individuals who are interested in properties could have knowledge of interests in particular properties. I expect Mr. Walker ought to be asked whether he feels he can act independently and without bias in this particular matter. It also seems that this is a legislative item, so he's disclosed his interest, and this can be, accounted for in the record and in the Commission's recommendation to the Assembly. But in the end, the Assembly is going to have the final say on this item.
I think just so it's on record, I'll run Mr. Walker through the kind of standard questions, and that way it's on record and if something comes up. So, Mr. Walker, do you have any substantial financial interest or private interest in the matter?
No.
Is your interest that of a substantial part of the present action?
No.
Is your interest that one varies directly and substantially with the outcome?
No.
Is your interest one that's immediate and known or conjectural and dependent on factors beyond the body's action?
No.
Is your interest generally possessed by the large group or that by an individual?
You know, I've read these questions 1,000 times, and
I mean, do you know anything outside of what this body knows or the greater good of documentation
no,
that's out there?
no.
I'd make a motion then to direct Mr. Walker to participate in case 2015-0036.
Please vote a positive motion directing Mr. Walker to participate. That vote fails. Can I ask Mr. Spring, I assume that is your issue that he should not be allowed to participate in any portion of the general plan or specific items related to Providence?
I'd be happy to change my vote if that was clarified to be the case. Yeah. And I think the Providence issues revolve around the land use plan map. So I think, in my opinion, he shouldn't be involved with proof of the land use plan map or anything that has to do with Providence in this area. And there's significant issues related to Providence and the land use plan map, especially the transfer development right issues, which I'm not sure I would disagree with, some of the issues brought up, but I think I'm really uncomfortable with saying that I agree that he should participate in that manner.
Okay, well, we will let that motion stand. Mr. Walker, you are directed to not participate in the UMed district plan process, but we've reordered it to the end, so you get to stick with us for a little while. Could I have Mr. Gange, disclosures?
No disclosures for me.
And I forgot to recognize Mr. Spinelli has joined us. Any disclosures?
None.
Ms. Dean?
On case D1A, I was not present for that meeting, so I will not be voting on that item.
Thank you. And likewise, on case 2015-0108, I was not present, so I will not be voting on that resolution. Thank you. Could I get a motion for the consent agenda, please? It's been moved by Mr. Kange, seconded by Mr. Spinelli. Is there any discussion? Seeing and hearing none, the consent agenda is approved.
Okay.
Okay, the next item up is a public hearing, case S12221. The procedure by which the public may speak to the Commission at its meeting is, after staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the Chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the Commission Rules of Procedures. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, receive 10 minutes, and part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups, community councils, PTAs, and so forth, 5 minutes, and individuals, 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except Commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals may be filed with the Clerk's Office within 20 days after approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the Commission's final decision. A fee for the appeal is required at the time of filing. Could we please have a staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into the staff presentation, I'd like to point the Commission to 2 minor corrections. The first being within the staff report on page 1, the staff report incorrectly identifies the property as being zoned R1A. It is actually R4SL. And then on page 2 of your staff report, the map shows that the property boundary, or that the petition site boundary has a small jog in it that jogs to the south and goes around a deed parcel. That is incorrect. The property owner has actually acquired that deed parcel, and the original approval for the plat included that parcel. So I just want to point the commission to those two minor corrections. On January 5th, 2009, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the subdivision of 2 tracts of land and 2 deed parcels into 3 tracts of land with the vacation of a 50-foot wide public access and electrical easement. The preliminary plat was approved for 60 months, subject to 16 conditions. A first 18-month time extension was approved by the Commission on May 5th, 2014 to allow the petitioner time to resolve the impacts that the State Department of Transportation and Public Facilities road improvements to O'Malley Road will have on this development. The petitioner is requesting that this time extension, for the same reasons as the first time extension, the impacts to this development by the expected road improvements to O'Malley have yet to be determined. This time extension request was received on August 19th, prior to the October 6th expiration date in accordance with AMC 2115-115D2. The current conditions are substantially the same as those that existed when the preliminary plat was originally approved. Reviewing agencies had either no comment or no objection to this time extension request, and the department would like to recommend approval of the second 18-month time extension to May 6th, 2017, subject to 2 conditions that are not in your staff report. We had 1 comment that came in late after the staff report was prepared, so I'd like to read into the record the 2 recommended conditions. 1, resolve with watershed management the need for water body mapping, and 2, resolve with watershed management the need for a FEMA flood study or a plat note prohibiting development along the creek. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you through the chair. Mr. Whitfield, of these original 16 conditions, do you know which have been completed to date and what are still out, which ones are still outstanding?
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, I do not know the status of resolving those conditions. I think the commissioner's or the petitioner's representative is here and probably could tell you where the project stands today.
Okay. And do you mind, again through the chair, do you mind repeating number 17 again, the first addition? I didn't quite catch the whole thing.
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, yes, 2 conditions I'd like to add. 1, resolve with watershed management the need for water body mapping, and 2, resolve with watershed management the need for a FEMA flood study or a plat note prohibiting development along the creek.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. That's all.
Anyone else with a question? I have one. What does I assume both these comments that came in were from the municipality, watershed management?
Yes, Mr. Robinson, that is correct.
Perhaps you could remind them that there's a reason that we ask for deadlines, especially from the municipality. But secondly, what does development along the creek mean?
Well, I think this is it has to do with your stream protection setback. They essentially want a FEMA flood study or a plat note that would prohibit development along the creek, probably within that stream corridor.
How would they go about engaging? So what is a FEMA flood study? I know what a flood study is, but what is it? Does a FEMA flood study require FEMA to approve the study and to add it to their mapping?
I believe so, Mr. Robinson. I think that's probably a better question posed to watershed management, but I believe that that's exactly what they mean.
And I think that's a pretty high bar, actually. But why would we actually ask them to do anything other than what they'd already be required to do under the zoning, such as a stream setback?
You know, that's a great question. They would have to provide the stream protection setback anyway. If the commission decided that they wanted to strike that condition from the approval, they can certainly do that. This is a recommendation coming from Watershed Management, so I'm simply, you know, honoring what or carrying forward what their recommendation would be.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions of staff. Could I hear from the petitioner, please?
Good evening, members of the board. Mr. Chairman, my name is Tony Hoffman. I work with the Boutte Company and representing Harold Green on this project tonight. This is a pretty standard extension, I think. I think it speaks on itself. We're waiting for DOT to come up with final plans so we can gauge the impact to the project. The elevation at Independence Drive is what really we're waiting for. There's been some back and forth about how much take they're going to take from the property. That's changed a few times, but I believe they are on final plans now. So that said, we agree with staff conditions, and we are open to talking about the watershed management change.
Thank you. You have 9 minutes and 15 seconds. Any questions? Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, Mr. Hoffman, could you talk about those 2 additional conditions that the city is asking for?
Well, honestly, we would have to go when we do the final set of plans, we're going to have to reevaluate the stream and remap it. We've already had that done once. There's no flood setback. There's no indication of flooding. There's no indication that FEMA will be involved in it. We will have to make sure that we stay out of the wetlands that have been mapped and previously identified and comply with the setbacks that are applicable. That said, it would be something we do in due diligence for the plan set anyway. The stream has done nothing but drop, so I don't have any objection to it, actually.
So is it actually redundant to what you're already doing?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Walker.
So, kind of pursuant to Mr. Robinson's comments earlier, do you feel that this FEMA standard is also redundant?
I do.
Okay.
But I've learned, you know, I do.
Okay. So, requiring it is no big deal? Or, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to
Well,
get at is...
I'm not going to sit here and fight it because
Okay.
that's something I'm not going to do. But you look on the FEMA maps and there's no indication on there that there's any flooding. So it's either way to me, I don't have an issue with it. It's working with watershed management and having them review the mapping that we have and then probably doing a field visit.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Spinelli.
The additional requirements, do you think that they will cause additional work by you, the consultant, and therefore add additional expense to the owner?
The first one, resolve with watershed management, the need for mapping or mapping upgrades, I have no problem with because we will do that as part of the civil plan set and the final platting. The need for FEMA mapping and resolve the need, I would have heartburn with that, and that would probably, depending on who the current FEMA coordinator at the city is, it would involve some extra time and cost, yes.
Thank you. I don't see anything else. I guess the one comment I would make is what I was unable to determine is by asking for a FEMA flood study, we're actually asking for FEMA map changes, which puts you into a whole nother world that I don't believe you want to get into.
I believe actually the way it was resolve the need, which always leaves that big door open, but nonetheless, I would think that we would want to strike it because it's not indicated on the FEMA mapping, and that's kind of a federal jurisdiction.
But it's not, the area is not currently shown as a flood area.
Not in the last time I looked.
Okay, thank you. As indicated, you have 9 minutes and 15 seconds for rebuttal.
Thank you.
We're now open for public testimony. Come one, come all. Going once, going twice. The public hearing is now closed. Or no, or maybe not. Can I ask Mr. Hoffman if he would like to rebut?
No, I have no more questions or no more comments.
What's the will of the body? Mr. Kange.
In regard to case S12221, request for a second 18-month time extension, I move to approve for a 60-month phased approval, subject to conditions 1 through 16 in our staff packet outlined on page 13, with the additional first comment made by staff to resolve with watershed water needs for mapping upgrades. I think I didn't capture all of it, but I don't feel that I need to have the FEMA flood study in there. So conditions 1 through 17 or 16 with the additional one comment.
Great. Could I just, for the record, could I have that 17th condition, Mr. Whitfield?
Through the chair, through the commission, resolve with watershed management the need for water body mapping, period.
Thank you. That motion is made by Mr. Kange and seconded by Mr. Walker. Mr. Kange.
Thank you. Again, I tend to support this motion. I can do some findings after it passes if you like, but that might probably be best.
Okay. Mr. Walker, anything? Is there any further discussion? Please vote. Motion approved. Mr. Kange.
Thank you. I'd just like to add that the reviewing agencies had no objection. It was not the request was received in accordance with Anchorage Municipal Code. The department recommends approval. It's supported in our staff packet on page 5, and there was no adverse comments here this evening from the public.
Thank you. Next case is 2015-0101, request for rezone from R2D, two-family residential district, and R2M, multiple family residential district, to B3SL, general business with special limitations district. Could we please have the staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The parcels to be that are subject to the request to rezone is Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision, which is referred to as Parcel A in the application, and Lots B and C, Block 4, Lake Spenard Park subdivision, that is the R2M zoned parcel, which is referred to as Parcel B in the application. Both are requested to be rezoned to B3SL. The special limitations that are put forward by the applicant are outlined on pages 4 and 5. They deal with prohibited uses and site design standards. Lot 1, which is Parcel A, is developed with a ranch-style dwelling constructed in 1955. Lots B and C is developed with a duplex constructed in 1975. Both of these construction dates are according to property appraisal records. The special limitations, as mentioned, are on pages 4 and 5 of the packet. The property is located west of Spenard Road, south of Valleywood Drive, and north of Breezewood Drive. Parcel A fronts onto Breezewood Drive, and Parcel B fronts onto Valleywood Drive. The proposal is to rezone the property for future development of a mixed-use commercial building. There is not a time frame when the property will be developed. In a meeting with the applicant and the applicant's representative, the lack of a time frame is due to the difficulty in obtaining financing for development proposals in the current market, which is tied to the falling price of oil. The rezone of Parcel A, Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision from R2D to B3SL does conform to the Spenard Commercial District Development Strategy and also the West Anchorage District Plan. The Spenard District Development Strategy is a 1986 plan, and excerpts of the plan were included in the packet. On page 15, the petition lots are outlined or identified in a portion of that land use strategy. The triangular-shaped lot is parcel A, Benson subdivision, and it is identified as an area in transition that is recommended for future commercial use. The other lots is two lots. It is developed as one economic parcel, and it is identified in the Spenard plan as a residential use. And the definition of the transition areas is defined on page 16. Transition areas are areas of potential commercial district expansion, limited expansion into residential zones by commercial uses along Spenard Road if proper buffering and screening are provided. Proposals are to be considered on a case-by-case basis and their own merits. So the request to rezone Parcel A does conform to both the Spenard Commercial District Strategy as well as the West Anchorage District Plan. The West Anchorage District Plan has incorporated some of the strategies and the underlying assumptions of the Spenard Commercial District development within that West Anchorage Plan. So even though the Spenard Plan is from 1986, the West Anchorage District Plan found that a lot of the assumptions and the strategies were valid today and has included those assumptions in the West Anchorage District Plan. The rezone to Parcel B, that would be lots B and C that front onto Valleywood Drive, does not conform to either of the plan, which is recommended in both the Spenard Plan and the West Anchorage District Plan to remain residential. Conversion of these two lots would result in the loss of potentially six dwelling units. Policy 14 of the Anchorage 2020 plan does state that, and I quote, "Conservation of residential lands for housing is a high community priority. No regulatory action under Title 21 shall result in a conversion of dwelling units or residentially zoned property into commercial or industrial uses unless consistent with an adopted plan." So therefore, the rezone of Parcel B would result in the potential loss of 6 dwelling units. However, public services and utilities are available to all the petition lots. Spenard Road is constructed with pedestrian facilities and lighting. Valleywood and Breezewood Drives are both constructed, however, they are constructed without pedestrian facilities. The division recommends approval of the rezone of Parcel A, which is Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision, from R2D to B3SL, subject to the special limitations regarding prohibited uses and design standards listed on pages 11 and 12 of the packet. It was assumed that if the property is developed, it would probably be developed next year. So the proposed prohibited uses were rewritten to be in accordance with the uses in the new Title 21, because the old Title 21 would not be valid next year. The division recommends denial of the rezone of Parcel B from R2M to B3SL, as it does not conform to the applicable plans. Now, there have been 3 return comments in support of the rezone of all the parcels, and it came to the division's attention that the Spenard Community Council meeting on Wednesday voted against the proposed rezones. the Spenard Community Council opposed losing potential residential zoned property for a speculative development, and they were concerned that the parcels would become surface parking lots until redevelopment occurred. That's about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Several questions. Ms. Dean.
Thank you. Through the chair, my question is splitting this case potentially, approving one lot and not the other lot is what you are asking for. Any particular procedural issues we should be aware of on how to proceed on splitting these? Do we hear information on each lot separately? What is the best way to proceed if you are suggesting separate, one approval and one denial?
Through the chair, Ms. Dean, it was identified as parcel A and parcel B, and so looking, there's essentially two lots. Even though 3 lots are involved, 2 lots are, parcel B is one economic unit. And so I think it would be looked at as there's an opportunity that one lot conforms to all of the applicable plans, and it was recommended for approval because it did conform with the applicable plans. The second parcel did not conform to either of the applicable plans. Therefore, the division could not, based on Policy 14, recommend approval of that particular parcel to be rezoned commercially. It is up to the commission whether they find that after the conclusion of the public hearing and what other comments that the commission hears, whether they find that both parcels should be rezoned, but I think they can address them in each rezone request independently of the other.
Thank you. I think Ms. Dean will just take two, if it comes to it, 2 separate motions if there's a desire that they not be the same determination. Thank you. Mr. Spring.
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Bryan. Do you know what the requirements are for screening on, let's say, parcel 1, the rezone only, would be if it was a parking lot? I'm particularly interested in the interface between this parcel and the residential R2D zoned parcel to the, I think, to the east. I'm just curious what kind of landscaping we're looking at. And the reason I ask is, I'll let you look it up.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Spring, under the new Title 21, it would be L2, which is a buffer landscape easement, buffer landscaping that would be required. And I believe you're speaking of lots B and C.
Well, yes, I would be interested in both, but I'm assuming both of these parcels would be parking lot primarily. So,
through the chair, Mr. Spring, I do not know if both parcels would be parking lot. I do believe that possibly that the parcels B and C that front onto Valleywood are at a lower elevation than the parcel to the north. Roughly the north, which is owned by the applicant. So any commercial development might include parcel A, parcel B, and the property that is not part of this application to the north. And that parcel B might be parking. I'm not sure about if there would be parking on the parcel A which is the triangular shaped parcel.
Okay, through the chair, if I could follow up, please.
Sure.
Okay, is there a difference between landscaping for parking lots and landscaping for commercial developments that doesn't include?
The buffer landscaping would be probably required along the southern boundary of parcel B, adjacent to residential. The use across Valleywood is a budget rental car agency, and that already is zoned B3. And the triangular parcel, there might be buffer landscaping along that southern property boundary because there's residential to the south.
And so buffer landscaping, remind me, is what, 10 feet? With so much mix of,
In the Title 21, it's a 15-foot wide,
oh, okay.
and it is – 2 trees and 6 shrubs per 20 linear feet of
so-
property line.
Through the chair. So the reason I asked is because I know the Spenard Commercial Corridor Plan anticipated these rezonings, some of these rezonings in certain areas. But I think they specified that there'd be subject to adequate buffering between the new commercial development and residential. So does the commercial corridor plan say what an adequate buffer is, or we assume that the landscape ordinance provides it by definition?
It says proper buffering and screening are provided in the definition of a transition area. And screening could also include fencing plus landscaping.
And I'm sorry to go on, but do you have any information about other rezonings that occurred along this corridor and whether or not fencing was required as part of it? I know there was one case, which I was involved with on the Planning Commission, where along the corridor, which I think we required screening, a 6-foot screening fence.
The applicant representative did provide a list of all the rezonings that have occurred along the southern corridor of Spenard Road. But the issue of what screening and fencing was provided was not written down, but they did provide photos of the screening and fencing that were provided, and those photos are included on pages 48, 49, 48 and 49 of the packet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Walker.
Is the figure on page 15 of our packet, is that the Spenard corridor plan?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, the Spenard corridor plan is many pages.
I understand that, but is
Long.
this from the, is this
It
from?
is
the plan?
from the Spenard Commercial District Development Strategy.
Okay.
And it's the page that included the current petition site, and it's also the page that provided the definition of what a transition area is.
Right, okay. So for simplicity, I'm going to call it the plan.
Plan.
So,
Bernard plan?
so I have this figure from the plan, and so it shows me that an arbitrary line that was drawn in 1986 says that lots B and C must be excluded from this rezone because they create a net loss of housing, but lot 1, it can be included because it was inside of this polygon that was drawn on this map in 1986? I mean, is that, what I'm asking you is why can we consider lot 1 on a case-by-case basis, to paraphrase your words, but we cannot consider lots B and C on a case-by-case basis.
Through the chair, the plan looked at this segment of Spenard Road, and they looked at it on a lot-by-lot basis, and they determined which lots should be considered for rezone and would be in the best interest of the neighborhood and the economy of the Spenard area to rezone. For instance, the United Building Supply site, that was recommended for rezone, and it's now a hotel. And the triangular piece was also looked at as potential for a rezone. So the neighborhood and the neighborhood weighed in quite heavily, especially the small businesses along Spenard Road, because I reread the parts of the plan, and they weighed in heavily on what would bolster the small businesses and bring more vitality to the Spenard Road commercial district. So they identified some of the lots that would be viable for rezoning to a potential commercial use. And they identified those with that hatched area. They did, but they also wanted to preserve the residential neighborhood, so they tried to limit the encroachment into the residential neighborhood by preserving most of the residential area and just looking at the corridor of Spenard Road to just increase and upgrade the vitality of the Spenard Road corridor.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. If I may, Mr. Walker, you have both areas, both lots in front of you, thus it is in front of you on a case-by-case basis. The plan, however, makes a distinction between those, and it's up to you to determine whether you agree with that or not.
Right. I'm just trying to clarify what we're being told so that I understand, what.
Yeah, but to be clear, both are in front of us, even though one was not in the plan as to be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you. Just procedurally, it sounds like, without hearing from the petitioner yet or any public testimony, but procedurally, and I can see it, that there's no real plan to do, no concept or no future plan. What happens procedurally if the parcel B gets denied this evening, parcel A, based on the recommendations of staff, parcel A gets approved? At what time can the petitioner come back once they do have a concept plan, or is it dead for them for a certain period of time before they can reapply once they do have something more concrete that they can present to, say, a community council for their buy-in, or the general public that may, who knows what it's going to have? I don't want to assume, but let's just say it has, some multifamily in the concept. At what point can the petitioner come back and request that parcel B to become approved? How long do they have to wait, I guess?
And I think, if I may, your question is if it moves forward to the Assembly and the Assembly finds the same recommendation to be true. Is that your question? Because this is not, ours is just a recommendation to the Assembly here this evening.
Oh. Yes, so I guess if, let's say the Assembly goes along with what we recommend, then what is the recourse of the petitioner aside from appeal? Like, how long do they have to put together a plan, and how long are they able to go without coming back to the Commission? Or until they can come back to the Commission?
Through the chair, under Section 2103-160 rezonings, waiting period for reconsideration. Following denial of a rezoning request, no new application for the same or substantially the same rezoning shall be accepted within 2 years of the date of denial unless denial is made without prejudice.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Ms. McConnell, do you want to weigh in?
I do. I think that would apply if the Assembly denies a rezone request. If the Commission recommends denial for we'll just say part of this rezone request, the applicant has 15 days from the adoption of the resolution to request that this be brought forward to the Assembly anyway. The Assembly has the option then to take up that rezone request or not take it up. The ordinance does not get carried forward by the chair at the request of the mayor. It has to have 3 Assembly sponsors. So I think if the Assembly were to, well, whether or not you recommend denial, if the Assembly were to deny it, they wouldn't be able to come back for 2 years. But I think if the Commission recommends denial and the applicant chooses not to carry that portion of the request forward to the Assembly, this particular provision would not be in effect, and they could then come back when they wished with a new application.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spinelli.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would like to ask, so the parcel across Valleywood has now been rezoned to B3 SL. And so on my Spenard community plan map, I hatched that one out. And the proposed parcel B in the rezone now looks like it extends less into the residential area than the neighboring parcel on the other side of Valleywood. And so it kind of makes it look like this plan is outdated now. And I just curious what staff thinks about that.
Was that Mr. Spinelli?
Yes.
So are you talking about
Budget rental car.
Budget rental car?
North of Valleywood,
Okay,
extending further east into the
yes,
residential neighborhood.
that is the lot, through the chair, that is the lot that's split lot zoned. And this is an old map, and it was rezoned, and it does extend south to what looks like a house on the lot to the east of that, or south of that. It's hard to tell in Spenard which way is which. But anyways, yeah, that is a split lot zoned. That extends all the way further south, and it's B3SL. And yeah, I did address that. I looked that up. And the special limitations on that case addressed buffer landscaping, site obscuring fencing, snow removal, lighting, and drainage requirements on the southern half of that property. So the northern half of that property is zoned B3, and then the southern half was zoned B3SL. So it has 2 different zoning districts, essentially.
Mr. Chair, if I could also follow up.
Please.
Through the chair, Mr. Spinelli, I wouldn't say that just because a plan is not always completely adhered to, that means that the entire plan is invalidated. I expect, that rezone that you're speaking of didn't follow the requirements of this plan, and that's probably the case in other situations and other plans, but that doesn't mean the plan no longer has any validity. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, I didn't mean the entire plan invalidated, just a little outdated in this area.
Thank you. Mr. Kange?
Thank you. And just to follow up on the plan, it's referred to the Spenard District Plan or Spenard Commercial District Development Strategy. What's the plan for timing on updating the Spenard plan, if you know? Thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Kange, I don't believe that that plan is going to be updated. However, and I ran into it, however, the West Anchorage District Plan found that the underlying assumptions and the strategy of the Spenard Commercial District Plan, when speaking of the properties along the Spenard corridor, were still valid. And they incorporated those assumptions and some of those strategies as it relates to the Spenard corridor into the West Anchorage District Plan. And so I don't think this specific plan will be updated, but I believe that it was in part incorporated into the West Anchorage District Plan. So when I read that in the West Anchorage District Plan, I thought it would be a good idea to bring in some of the original concepts that were included in this 1986 plan.
Great, thank you.
Seeing no additional questions for staff, could the petitioner please come forward? Please state your name, and you have 10 minutes. Is there an amount that you'd like to reserve for rebuttal?
Yes, I would like to reserve a minute or two for rebuttal. Oh, let's put a minute down for rebuttal.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a number of items I'd like to share with the Commission.
Your name for the record, please, sir.
Pardon me, sir. My name is Steve Agnew. I am representing the petitioners Rick and Catherine Richter on this rezone petition, and I have some exhibits that will help clarify some of the very points that you were questioning. Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, in your questions to staff, you settled on a very important point right away that I would like to share with you. It's my excerpt from my file that includes the original text of the Spenard Commercial District Redevelopment Strategy, a plan that was adopted in 1986. I have only one copy, so I will share it with you. Commissioner Walker was correct in immediately asking the question, does the case-by-case analysis apply to only those areas that are designated on the exhibit as transition or to the entire corridor? And in fact, in the text that I've shared with Chairman Robinson, it makes clear that the areas outlined as transition may be exceeded in some individual circumstances where they are warranted and the conditions to limit impacts are satisfied. And while that plan goes back to 1986, it was in fact incorporated into the West Anchorage plan. And so those of us who go back that far, when I was the individual who led the renovation of the United Lumber site and achieved the rezoning on the transition piece there. It was in fact expanded to provide enough area for, in that case, the Marriott Courtyard. There's another very important element of the West Anchorage District Plan, and that was a plan adopted in 2011, the Spenard Corridor Technical Report. And in that plan, it seeks to identify those parcels that are suited to redevelopment, those parcels that can be renovated or developed with new building to increase, obviously, assessed valuation and commerce in the area. And that plan sought to look at the floor area ratios of buildings, or excuse me, of developed lots, typically less floor area to land means that the land's being underutilized. The value of the land, typically low value, means the land's being underutilized. And the third point, the year built. Older buildings typically are required to be renovated, demolished, torn down. In this case, they scored all three factors, and in attachment 2 in the packet that I just handed you, there is a heat map where they judge by, or they identify by color the properties that are suited to be redeveloped. And in this case, Mr. and Mrs. Richter's property that they have assembled is identified in the 2011 plan as most suited to redevelopment. So we have two plans that A, identify the areas to be redeveloped, and B, give us the opportunity to redevelop them in a manner that is not impactful to the surrounding community. And in this case, while there's been a reference by staff to parking lot, the vision is not parking lot as a primary use. It is parking lot as the support or accessory function or use that obviously supports a building. So when you look at the new Title 21, we now have, of course, the parking ratios based on gross floor area. We have snow storage. We have internal landscaping and external landscaping and buffer landscaping. All the increments of land commitments that make any site necessary to support a building. And so the reference to parking area, while technically maybe accurate, does not describe the principal use. Now, the staff refers to the overall policy number 14 as the obstacle, the objection to the use of this property for any commercial purpose. That in of itself is not a reason to oppose a viable use that's going to continue to invigorate Spenard Road. The West Anchorage plan identifies, approximately, I've lost my place here, pardon me. The West Anchorage plan identifies approximately 17,691 dwelling units in West Anchorage. And there's a potential to add another 1,142. So there, per the plan's analysis, about 6.5% of the housing stock could be added. These 6 dwelling units represent about 0.5% of that potential new residential housing stock. It's not a large hit or reduction of potential housing stock. And if there is any opportunity to add residential stock, it will be in the development of larger accumulations of building, 40 to 60 dwelling units, which most professionals will tell you is the minimum necessary to make a viable rental development. And so we believe that with proper buffering, the placement of the building on Spenard Road, the parking that will flow behind it on the lower elevation property, this can be a very viable and worthy development. And we have 2 important letters of support that just came in. One of them is from the neighbor to our east. I'm going to call it Plan East. If you look at the parcel B, and if you say that the budget rent-a-car is due north or planned north, the property to the right or the east is the owner, is owned by Mr. Fages. And we were finally able to contact Mr. Fages, as he is a professional big game guide, and he gave us a letter of support that I don't know if Margaret got today, but he told me he emailed it to staff today, and if I could share that with the chair.
Yes, that'd be fine, and your time's getting tight here, so I want to make sure you have a minute left.
The only other point I would like, thank you for giving me this little courtesy, is the only meaningful staff comment other than this discussion of the residential housing stock came from the Department of Transportation, noting that you must be aware that this is in the 65 decibel noise zone as a result of airport operations. Mr. Richter, who has kept his office on this property for over 10 years and who is a professional licensed appraiser with experience and knowledge in noise attenuation and the cost incurred thereby, would be the first to be able to testify and tell you that dwelling units in this area are not favored due to noise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agnew. You have 1 minute remaining for rebuttal. Are there any questions of the petitioner? Seeing none at this time, the hearing is now open for the public.
My name is Bruno Zedler. I'm a resident in the area. I've lived there for a long time, and I'm at least a part owner of 3 parcels. I heard that it's known to the board that this is a speculative approach. I'd like to add this is a purely speculative approach. There's an undue intrusion and a premature intrusion into the residential area, primarily on Valleywood. The petitioner also mentions that there was a precedent set about 20 years ago in that car rental place. Well, at that time, a plan was proposed to create a business. Additional space was needed. Today we heard about all kinds of plans. The only plan that's missing is a development plan by the petitioner. I don't think that's the right approach. I ask this board to deny this petition at this time in its current form. I'd like to also add that on Valleywood, where this parcel in question is, the right-of-way on Valleywood is only 40 foot. If there's any further traffic created into the remaining residential area, there's going to be a real mess. And how to remedy that is almost impossible because that property is rather narrow and they cannot yield much to additional right-of-way. So I would like for the board to deny this petition in its current form at this time. I think it's fair to say, with all the plans that were talked about, there should be a development plan by the petitioner and not just a speculative approach at the expense of the residential area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Before you leave, could you spell your last name for us?
My last name is Zedler, Z-E-D-L-E-R. First name would be Bruno.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Robert Auth, A-U-T-H. I'm a longtime resident of the area. I live on Melvin Avenue, and I've been active in the Spenard Community Council and in some of these plans that have been presented. Although I'm speaking on my own behalf, I'm not an officer in the Spenard Community Council. I have been a past president on 3 different occasions, and it was this matter was discussed. We spent an hour on it at our meeting last Wednesday, and the issue came down as what is the plan? What is the development? And Mr. Agnew talked about different scenarios. It might be this, it might be that, it might be something else. And in the end, it's speculative, and that's why the Community Council overwhelmingly rejected it. And it's because of and we were dealing with the Spenard Road Development District Strategy Plan that does say for transition areas identified as having potential to support commercial district expansion, proposals should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis on their own merits. That presumes that there's something being presented to evaluate. The council and the neighborhood had nothing to evaluate. We don't know how big the buildings are going to be, if they're going to be multiple buildings, whether they're going to front on Spenard Road. What about lighting? What about traffic? What about parking? Nothing. We have nothing to evaluate. In the end, that was the basis for the rejection. Additionally, there is no shortage of B3 opportunities on Spenard Road. Sadly, on Spenard and Aspen, there is an empty lot that's been for sale for over a year. It's zoned B3. No takers, no nothing. Actually, the budget rent-a-car, I believe, is just an empty building now. I think that's also available. We have a lot of empty. If you go along Spenard Road, in that part of Spenard Road, there's a lot of buildings for sale and for lease. And so there's no shortage of B3 in that area. For that reason, I think the council was amenable, at least for the Breezewood property, to some kind of development, but there wasn't anything to consider. And I don't think this commission should be approving speculative rezones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. You have a couple questions. Ms. Dean.
Through the chair, thanks for coming tonight. The city is asking us to split this into two separate approvals. The lot on Breezewood, they're suggesting we approve the rezone, and then on Valleywood to not approve. You had alluded that you guys had also discussed that possibility too in the community council, but didn't discuss it any further because you didn't have enough development information.
Right. I think there was always on the Valleywood side, because it was so deep in the neighborhood and it was kind of behind the black line, so to speak, with regard to this plan. There was going to be resistance to that. That was the consideration. Well, what about Breezewood? But what's the project? So we never got past that question, really, because there wasn't any project.
What used to be the business on tract AB3? Do you remember what business that was? Was it the knife store?
Well,
no, it's not. Okay, I'm trying to remember.
I don't want to.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Got another question here, Mr. Spinelli.
So, let's just assume that the reason he didn't put a plan together was because he wasn't sure, didn't want to bear the expense of developing a plan before the plan was approved, the rezone was approved. And so let's just imagine, I mean, it's easy for me to imagine because I work in this field every day, but let's imagine he put together a great plan and maybe buffered Valleywood from whatever he was going to use in that parcel B. Is that something you think, had he had those plans already put together and to show, and there was a reasonable buffer similar to the property across Valleywood, that was something the community council would have been less opposed to, maybe in favor of?
It certainly would have been considered. I think the council would have had to be convinced that the Valleywood properties were essential to the development that was fronting Spenard Road, because it does. Valleywood's a dead-end street, but still there is going to be traffic considerations and lighting and things like that. You know, whether it's going to be a 24-hour operation situation, matters like that we weren't able to even address.
Can I just follow up one more through the chair? When you've said lighting a couple times, and it's tough to know where people fall on that one. So would you be in favor of more lighting or against lighting?
Well, I understand that. Personally, be concerned about lighting that's, especially during a time of day that people are trying to sleep, and having some light pouring into your bedroom window, that kind of thing. That's what I think about it.
Okay. So too much lighting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I had a question for staff on the topic that was raised. Could you just describe for us the criteria that we are evaluating the request for rezoning with, and whether or not the criteria necessitates an actual development plan? And if you want to use the word speculative or not, you could do that too, but it's not, I think that's what we're talking about.
I think through the years, both types of rezoning have come forward to planning and zoning commissions. Sometimes fully developed plans have come forward and property has been rezoned, and for one reason or another, those development plans never came to fruition, and subsequently the land was never developed according to that original plan, and had to be rezoned for development later on. Sometimes it comes forward without a development plan, and through the years there has been a sort of hesitance to rezone on speculatively without a plan, and that's viewed as speculative rezoning. And it is difficult to rezone when there isn't a proposal that comes forward, because commissions have been hesitant to rezone without a proposal to look at that would enable the commission to determine whether it would be conducive to the adjoining neighborhood, whether it would work well, whether any negative impacts could be softened to the adjoining neighborhood without knowing what the use is going to be. So speculative rezones have been more difficult for commissions to try to work through and make a decision on those rezones. And I can understand that in times of a difficult economy, that the argument on the side of people that own the property is that, well, I have to have the rezone to be ready for when a development comes along, because financing is hard to obtain, and rezones take a long time. So that seems to be the situation that the current petitioner is in.
No, understood. I think I was trying to ask a simpler question, but thank you, Mr. Ryan. I think the question is fundamentally the petitioner is not required to have a specific development proposal to move forward with a rezoning. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Spinelli, are you still in the queue? Or are you okay? Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I just want to follow up with the staff here, clarifying the Spenard corridor plan strategies here. I mean, it seems obvious that the plan anticipated there's lots along Spenard that are too small and awkwardly shaped to be developed. I mean, and so it said basically, let's draw lines along here and let's consider rezonings in these properties so that somebody can come in and develop something. In this case, there's one lot facing Spenard Road, which I don't know the size of it. That's not subject to the rezoning, but it's a fairly big lot. It's not a small, awkwardly triangular shaped lot. It seems to me this lot could be developed without adding on additional lots adjacent to it. So I guess my question is, if I was looking at this case by case and I'm trying to interpret the Spenard Road corridor plan, would I conclude, or would staff conclude that this lot's big enough to be developed, and it doesn't really need to have expanded zoning parcels adjacent to it to allow a development. You could put like a Wendy's on it. You could put, there's lots of fast food restaurants in the area. It can be developed without having some type of additional parcels added to it through a rezoning. No? Or
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
With all due respect to Mr. Spring and his question, could we finish the public hearing before getting into this sort of debate?
Yes, thank you, Ms. McConnell.
Sorry, Mr. Spring.
Anyone else wishing to testify?
Don't take my time yet, because I wanted to point out my husband is Robert Auth. I'm Margaret Auth, A-U-T-H. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. For some reason, he sent a comment online dated October 28th that was not part of the packet, and I'm wondering why not, and how to get it to the commissioners.
If you want to submit it tonight.
Well, it was submitted online. I'm just questioning why it wasn't in the packet. So, yes, I guess it would be good for them to see it, because he did bring these things up. So do I give it to you?
If you'd like to give it to the chair.
Oh, okay. May I push?
Yeah.
I was able to work with Tyler Robertson and Thee Tobish on the West Anchorage District Plan. I've been an active Spenard land use person now for about 25 years. When we were working on the West Anchorage District Plan, we thought the plan was just fine the way it was. One of the key concerns that we had, and as has been stated by Chris Schutte recently, since Mayor Berkowitz came in, is there is a big push right now for affordable housing. Now, understandably, when you have dilapidated housing, the first thought is let's get rid of it, tear it down, and make it more commercially viable. The problem is that we also have this overhanging problem of non-affordable housing in the Anchorage Bowl. It actually is really close to, we have a lot of support industry right now that is geared for the airport, but the workers, I wish I can come up with a number for that, but it was discussed in the West Anchorage District Plan, how many of them are actually commuting from the valley. It seems to me that it would be well to keep this as multifamily residential. Why not tear it down? Why not make it bigger? Maybe an additional storage, another story, as that's been allowed now with the recent passage. I'm not saying 6 or 7 stories, but I know that there is a plan out there that wants to put 6-story buildings right behind my house, and quite a few of them. And I'm thinking, why is it that on the one hand in Spenard, literally blocks away from here, they're talking that housing needs are so strong that we need to put 680 units in, and then we're talking about, maybe 8 blocks away that housing is so useless that it should be torn down and turned commercial. We've been watching for years as Spenard Road has been stripped of housing, and it's on a very good bus line. And the plans for the future in the Anchorage 2020, West Anchorage District Plan, Spenard, everything, has been...
You have a little more time, please.
Thank you. Has been geared to how we're going to move people around. And here we have a very viable bus system going up and down. And if we don't put housing close by where people can access that, we're going to be at odds with the plan. So I'm just appealing to you. I understand the need to make this place more vibrant, but I also do not want to see so many residential units being lost, especially in such good places close to commercial areas and the airport.
Thank you. You have a question. Mr. Spinelli.
Through the chair. So I grew up in Spenard. I attended Northwood Elementary. I built houses, so I like residential land. Just wanted to let you know there's 2 duplex lots for sale on Breezewood that have been on the market for maybe more than a year and a half now. And so I just wanted to point out that there's land available to be redeveloped to residential or be developed into residential because they're both vacant, and it's just not happening just because of it's hard to make an affordable house, and I just wanted to kind of point that out.
May I address that?
Yes, since it was a question to you somewhere, you may.
I guess my point is, or my husband made the point that there is a lot of empty land right now. In fact, Mr. Agnew came to our community council a year and a half ago and pled with us to rezone on Aspen and Spenard because there was a plan that was ready to go right away. Now, 2 years later, it's still sitting there with a chain link fence. I think right now it's tough, but I think it's tough on both sides. And I think that once you lose that residential, it goes up in value when it's B3, and it's a lot harder to turn it back into residential because somebody's going to have to pay a lot for that land. So, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Thanks.
Anybody else wishing to testify?
Do I have any time left?
I believe you did not, sir. That was, but anyone else that hasn't testified may testify. Going once, going twice. Petitioner, I believe you have a minute remaining.
May I confer with the directors first? I just want to ask them a quick question.
Sure. Mr. Agnew, before you go forward, did you need this back? You handed
No,
me
I have a copy.
Great.
If I may be allowed just one short comment, and then I'm going to turn the mic over to Mr. Richter. The parcel on Aspen that was referred to here this evening is in escrow now to be purchased by an owner user who's going to have a really exciting business going there.
Thank you. You have, welcome, sir. Unfortunately, you have a limited amount of time, but please state your name for the record.
My name is Rick Richter, and my wife and I own the property and have for years. My office is there, and what the intent is and has been is to build a new commercial building which will house my office and some other tenants, hopefully. I have several designs which I could show. I could have taken them to the community council, but you know, any project that I do there will the community council gets another bite of the apple. You guys get, or you don't, but the city gets a bite of the apple. So to say that the rezoning will allow me to do anything is incorrect. A couple other
Well, just
points.
sum up, unless there's, I need you to sum up really quickly unless there's other questions for you here.
All right. In summation is historically what the city has done is allowed property owners who have multiple properties that are mixed-use zones to assemble them under one zone to develop. And that's what I'm wanting to do. I'm not a speculator coming in to rezone an area. The property right next door to me is an L-shaped property that is bigger than mine, extends down long. I want the same kind of treatment that my neighbors have, and that's one of the obligations of the board is to treat people fairly, and that's all we're asking is that we get a fair treatment. You'll get another bite at any development that we do there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions for the petitioner? One last question, sir. No? Yes? Mr. Walker.
So it does sound like you have a bit of a plan. Can you just share some more of those details with us, since that's going to be relevant?
Well, I've had 3 serious offers. One for a hotel. One of the guys who's been building hotels around, through his realtor, has approached me on acquiring the property. If you noticed, and I'm sure that the lady and her husband back here and the gentleman over here noticed, there was a sign on the property for a while from some realtor because I had a option to purchase. Somebody came and said, hey, I got a plan for a multi-use commercial building, and so I gave him an option, and then the things in the economy changed and they couldn't get it done. The third entity that has approached me is a high-end dinner house who would like to put a high-end restaurant there. My preference is to put a multi-family or multi-use office building with my office on top overlooking Lake Hood, where I fly in and out of all the time. I have building sketches of that, parking lot sketches of it. But the point is I could come in and with a sketch saying I'm going to do a hotel, or I'm going to do, I'm going to make Mother Teresa's home here. And I could come here and lie to you and tell you that we've got this great project, and then you rezone it, and I do what I want anyway. But I'm not. I came here honestly saying I own a piece of property. I own 2 pieces around me. I'd like to assemble them into one and develop them into a commercial deal. I'm not I've been here 40 years, and I'm not a fly-by-night speculator.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Public hearing is now closed. What's the wish of the body? Mr. Spring. Mr. Spring, is your mic on?
Sorry. Pardon me. In the matter of case 2015-0101, I move to recommend approval of the rezone of Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision from R2D to B3SL, and to recommend denial of lots, I get a little confused here because I hear different names, but I think lots B and C, Block 4, Lake Spenard Park subdivision from R2M to B3FL. That'll be the denial part of it. With
could you hold on just a sec? Hold those other issues.
There were some conditions of approval I'd just like to add.
Mr. Spring, my preference is that we have affirmative motions for, if you need to do one affirmative and one for denial, I'd like they be done as separate motions so that we have affirmative motions on both motions.
Okay. Yes.
So if you could, if that's the way you want to do it, could you start a motion with the first lot?
Oh, separate.
We're going to they both have to be affirmative. If you want them separate, then our motions, our rules are that we have affirmative motions.
Sure. Well, then I might as well put it together since I have to make an affirmative motion, and so.
Well, but if you want a different result, then your only option is to have it done separately.
Okay. So first motion is to recommend approval of the rezone of Lot 1, Block 2, Benson subdivision from R2D to B3SL with the conditions recommended by staff on pages 4 and 5, which include usage allowances and site design standards.
Do you also wish to adopt the department recommendations on page 11? and 12. I'm still lacking a second, but Ms. O'Brien, you have a comment?
Mr. Chair, I was just going to mention that the actual conditions were on page 11 and 12.
Thank you. So I believe that the motion is as staff has stated. Am I correct, Mr. Spring, under section A on page 11 and 12?
That's correct.
Just dealing with lot 1. That is the motion on the table. It's been seconded by Mr. Kange. Mr. Spring? If Mr. Spring would like to speak to the motion, otherwise there are others in the queue too. The floor is yours if you so desire.
Well, I'm going to support the motion. I think this fits into the rationale that the Spenard corridor plan anticipated. This is a triangular-shaped lot. It seems, I'm not a developer, as you know, but it seems like this would be a very difficult lot to develop, given its irregularity. And it makes sense to combine it to the existing B3SL lot so that it can be developed rationally. And it does look like the Spenard corridor plan and designated this as one of those cases where we should look at for rezoning, and it is also supported by the land use map in the West Anchorage District Plan, so it seems like we should do it.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. Mr. Walker.
I apologize, but I have a question for making this so late, but I have a question for staff through the chair. I had a note in here that I had overlooked earlier during the staff report. Under the traffic engineering, there's a recommendation from traffic engineering that a sidewalk would be installed along Breezewood, and I guess I wanted to know who the staff is suggesting would pay for that sidewalk.
Yeah, staff, you can answer that, but I note that that is not one of your recommendations as part of the conditions as part of the rezone. But anything you'd like to add to that?
Through the chair, Mr. Walker, that could possibly be by the applicant through the building permit.
So is this something that could be imposed on the applicant later? So, I mean, obviously, we're not approving it with traffic's recommendations here, but could they impose this sidewalk on the applicant later on?
Through the chair, I think that would be resolved during the building permit, either with an agreement through the municipality to participate in that, the cost of providing sidewalks, or it could be imposed through the improvement required by the, as a result of the improvement to the property. There's not a plat that goes with this, and certainly there isn't, it can't be required through any platting action or a subdivision agreement. So I think it would have to be resolved during the building permit if the property is developed under a building permit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Ms. Dean?
Through the chair, I will not be supporting this motion. I don't want to see the loss of another home. We have lost so much housing in Anchorage due to the DOT tearing down enormous amounts of single-family housing in Anchorage, and I just can't see yet another home go away in Anchorage.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Anyone else? Please vote. That motion passes.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to add as part of the findings that this particular approval was recommended by the staff packet on pages 11 and 12. this particular rezone seems to meet the, what are we calling it, the Spenard Commercial Corridor Plan for the record.
Great, thank you. We have now dealt with half of the petition in front of us. Is there a motion for the second half? Mr. Spring.
All right, I'll try to do this one better this time. In the matter of case 2015-0101, I move to approve the rezone of lots B and C, Block 4, Lake Spenard Park Subdivision from R2M to B3SL, subject to the special limitations detailed by staff on pages 11 and 12.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. This is for rezoning for recommendation of approval to the Assembly. I need a second. Mr. Kange has seconded. Mr. Spring.
Well, I'm not going to be supporting this motion. I agree with the staff report. I don't see that there's, we've been presented with good evidence that there's a need to rezone these properties in order to develop the parcel that fronts Spenard Road. There's, for instance, there's a Taco Bell right down the street that's on basically the same size lot was just recently built, I believe, or if not, within the last 10 years. And there's numerous other instances where development has occurred on similar sized lots. This is just a matter of increasing the lot size to have a bigger development. It's not meant to allow a development on a lot that's substandard or awkward or that can't be developed. Just simply, petitioner wants a bigger development. And I don't think that's what the intent of the Spenard Corridor plan was. And so then you have to consider the fact if we did rezone this, then obviously the properties to the south would be the next in line to be rezoned. Those lots would be very untenable for development of a redevelopment as multifamily. It's surrounded on two sides anyway with commercial development. And I don't think it's a logical break there between the commercial and the residential. There is somewhat of a logical break between the property to the north, but I think you need to have some type of right-of-way in order to create a significant enough buffer between commercial and residential. Just a single property line with maybe a landscape buffer is not sufficient to really protect the neighbors or the residential dwellers who live on the property to the south of this proposed rezoning.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. And before I go to the others in the queue, I will remind you that the motion is to support the rezoning. It does not adopt any of the previous conditions that were presented on the other lots. So please bear that in mind before you move forward. Mr. Walker.
So I haven't decided yet, but I am inclined to support the motion. And I'd like to go through some of those reasons, since I think this is the more controversial of these two here. I am uncomfortable relying on a 30-year-old plan with an arbitrary black line that anyone could have drawn. And I mean, I remember I grew up here and I bought my first radio-controlled car at Anchorage House of Hobbies, which was a few doors down from this. And that building no longer exists. In fact, I think it is the Taco King now. And so this place has changed a lot in 30 years, and I'm not comfortable with that. The lines are arbitrary. We did see some language in the plan, the SCDDS plan tonight, that was brought forward by the applicant that I think makes a compelling argument that we can consider that on a case-by-case basis outside of those boundaries. And it does take time to rezone, and good tenants don't always wait. Where there's been a lot of discussion about the use, and Mr. Spring pointed out we could put a Taco King there, but there's already a Taco King there. There aren't any good casual dining restaurants along Spenard there, really anywhere, and this is an area where there should be a casual dining restaurant, and you could not develop a casual dining restaurant without those two lots. So just to interject a potential use that you could not do on this site without this extra space. I feel like we're making it incumbent on the applicant to that there's no right-of-way there, but the right-of-way, most of the right-of-way would have come from the budget rent-a-car site. And I think just on equity, I mean, the site to the north of it, what we're calling budget, which is owned by the Stanley family and I think is now Enterprise Car Rental, you know, that site extends much farther to the east. And so just on equity, it feels to me like we should consider parcel B and C there. So I guess that's all I have to say. That's those are the things that I'm considering, and for those reasons, at this point, I'm feeling inclined to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Kange.
Thank you. Commissioner Walker brings up some good points. I won't be supporting this motion, though, and had there been more discussion of potential buffers along Valleywood that would have addressed the community council's concern, but my biggest concern is that this was opposed by the community council. It wasn't, in fact, supported by the staff because they felt that the standards were not met. And albeit a 30-year-old plan, it is the plan that is in place. You know, but again, I want to state that I don't want to hinder the applicant from doing a development. I just would have, without having a plan to evaluate, it's harder with the time frame and buffering, and it's harder for me to evaluate this, and so I would rather err on the side of caution and let the applicant get his proverbial ducks in a row and potentially come back in the near future if they do have something a bit more concrete. So unfortunately, I'd rather err on the side of caution here.
Thank you, Mr. Kange. Mr. Walker.
So in the same thread there of allowing the applicant to get their ducks in a row, we're obviously approving the Breezewood parcel, but and it's clear that things are stacking up not to approve the Valleywood parcel. I guess I'm asking staff, is it possible to let them rescind their application for the Valleywood parcel at this point, so that we're not, if we deny it, does that somehow hamstring them from coming in sooner if they do have a designed, stated use that?
Mr. Chair, I think that it actually states if they come back with the exact same application, they'd have to wait for 2 years. If they came back with some proposal for the site, that would not be the exact same application.
I think what we clarified earlier, if I may, is that if this were to go forward to the assembly as is and this section gets denied, then you would have the 2-year clock ticking. If they choose to resubmit an application without going forward to the assembly, at least on this portion, whether you can bifurcate it or not is probably a good question, then my understanding, as we explored earlier, was that that 2-year clock did not sort of kick in.
That'd be correct.
Is that correct? And maybe because I asked it, could you answer, would they be able to go forward with half of an application and be held harmless on a second session, the Lot B, if in fact they so choose?
Yeah. Mr. Chair, normally when the commission has made a recommendation, that's what we carry forward to the assembly, or I'm sorry, a positive recommendation, that's what we'll carry forward to the assembly. So if the applicant does not request that the denial portion go forward, then we would just carry the Lot 1 approval, where it was recommended approval, we would just carry that portion forward to the assembly. It would be up to the petitioner whether 15 days after you approve your resolution, whether they wanted to ask the assembly to also consider the lots that you recommend denial, if that is your action.
Thank you, Ms. McConnell. So the motion on the table is to approve the rezone for lots B and C, 2906 Valleywood Drive to B3 SL. but the motion, as currently stated, does not carry forward any additional criteria as was carried forward for the previous lot. What's the wish of the body? Please, ready to vote? Please vote. That case is denied. Thank you, Mr. Agnew. And petitioners, we're going to take about a 10-minute or 5 to 10-minute recess and come back and take up the UMed district plan. We are back in session. I want to acknowledge for the record that Mr. Walker has left. He was recused from the following case, which is case 2015-0036, recommendation to adopt the UMed district plan public hearing draft. And we'll start with a staff report, and if you could also please clarify in that report what all we are being asked to approve or adopt or recommend to the Assembly for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine Bonnell, Senior Planner with the Long Range Planning section of the Community Development Department. So what you have in your packet is a memo from Carol, myself, and Hal Hart, dated November 9th, and it discusses the submittal of the UMed District Plan on October 12th to your body. We received public testimony at that time, and then the public hearing was closed. Planning and Zoning Commission members had several comments and on several different items, and we incorporated those comments into Exhibit B, which is included with this packet. Those comments start on page 9. We want a recommendation of approval for the plan, and then there's a recommendation for approval of the land use plan map, and then if the commission wishes, recommendation of approval of the comment response table. Those 3 items will be forwarded on to the Assembly for their approval. We also provided, because of the I guess the lack of information for the land use plan map, we have provided for you several maps related to master planning in the UMed district by some of the UMed organizations. That includes APU, UAA, ANTHC, and then tonight we also gave you a master plan map, that a draft map that we were given by Dow for the Providence campus. In your discussion on October 12th, you wanted to know the changes between the adopted land use plan map that is with the plan that we're updating, the 2003 plan. And so what we did is we included with the land use plan map that you're going to adopt just kind of an outlined areas that show the differences between the 2003 land use plan map and the map that's going to be going forward with the UMed district plan update. So the actual land use plan map in your packet starts on page 23, and then the comparison map is located on page 35. The land use plan map also includes land use descriptions, and those are, again, the land use plan map is on page 23, and then the descriptions go through page 31 of your packet. There's a few suggestions that we would like to make tonight, and I can give those suggestions to you now, or we can wait for you to go through the comment response table. It's up to you. And they're with respect to an existing zoning map and some of the language we just wanted to clarify a little bit. And And then there's a couple of projects that were proposed for inclusion. And then the other thing that I also wanted to say, and I wanted to thank Commissioner Spring for meeting with Carol and Hal and I about a week ago to go over the land use plan map and some of the comments that we heard at the October 12th meeting. As far as zoning changes and that kind of thing goes, we had a very fruitful meeting. We actually kept him for about 3 hours, and he did a great job representing the commission, and we really appreciate that. So with that, if I believe in your email you said you wanted to go through the comment response table, so if you wanted to start on that, that's on page 3, the comments that we heard a month ago.
Yeah, thank you. I might poll commissioners, but I think that's generally how we'll go. Could you just, you lost me a little bit. The land use plan map that we are adopting this evening is on which page?
It's located on page, oh, I apologize. It's located on page 23, and then the land use descriptions that accompany the land use plan map are included, and they go through page 31.
And the map on page 35 is what?
I need to step back just for a second. On page 23, the land use plan map has a lot of black lines on it, which shows the changes that were made from 2003 to now. And I don't think that you want to approve the land use plan map with those black blobs on there. So what do you do? Approve the one that's in the plan. So what we would suggest is that you approve the map that's included on page 67 of the plan. And then the comparison map that you're looking at is located on page 35.
So that's the current guidance, that's the current land use plan map as with the currently adopted UMED district plan, is that correct?
Yes, sir, on page 35.
Okay, I think going through the matrix would be fine. Can I get sort of a nod or something? Is that, Mr. Spring, does that sound like something, the approach you'd like to take? And the land use plan map comes up in the course of that? Is that how that works?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I was anticipating, yes.
So if you could walk us through the matrix, and I didn't mention, but I believe Mr. Potter and others should know, but the public hearing is closed on this matter, just to clarify. Okay, Christine, where do you want to start from?
Okay, so let's start on page 3. Under that green heading that says comments received at Planning and Zoning Commission, public hearing 1012. Commissioner Spring, it's on page 9 of your packet. Commissioner Spring motion to delete street design standards shown on page 46, and then an implementation item 44.6.A on page 80. And that was based on comments received from MOA Private Development. And what MOA Private Development was saying is the UMED district plan design standards don't meet the design standards that MOA Private Development usually goes by. And our argument with that is that the 2003 UMED plan design standards have been adopted, and that is how roadways, trails, et cetera, are usually developed within the UMED district. And to now strike those design standards would be taking away the guidance that we use to develop projects within the UMED district. And just a case in point on that, we did some research on a Providence project, and actually that was done over the past couple of years, and the Providence project refers to those design standards. No, this is what you want right here. refer to those design standards. Anything that UAA or APU builds has built in the past few years is built to those design standards, roadway, building, et cetera. And so to take away them now would not be consistent with what we've done in the UMed district for several years.
Thank you, Ms. Bunnell. Are there any questions on that and topic, knowing that we will have an opportunity to debate them, but if you want clarifications?
Oh, yes, I think I do in
Thanks.
this case, so I'll try not to do that in all of them. But just a note, I think, on a section further down the line, staff does agree that to remove the designations as integrated campus in both scenarios, and that was one of my issues with this illustrative district street and path sections, because that's clearly outdated. That was the old plan. There's no integrated scenario anymore, and et cetera, so that's not relevant. The illustrations look like they show sidewalks abutting street curbs. I don't believe that would be consistent with the pedestrian plan. Is that what the illustrations show, staff? Is that there's no separation in the sidewalks? Because it looks like the 4-lane with the kind of the boulevard with the tree in the middle, looks like the sidewalk's right next to the street. Is that what the design standard's supposed to be?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, which one are you looking at? Pedestrian and bike path?
Well,
or-
they're actually all like that. None of them appear to have any separation between the sidewalk and the curb.
Well, there's separation on
Maybe the 2-lane section.
campus entry. There's separation on, because the sidewalks are shown between like the lighting and the landscaping there. So this, in some of it, the separation would be the lighting. We apologize, there isn't dimensions on these, and maybe one of the things that we should do is add dimensions. We could do that to clarify this.
Also, I don't see any bike lanes in here on any of the cross sections. Is the intent not to have any bike lanes?
The bike lane, the on-street striped bike lanes are not in the UMed district, I don't believe.
I don't
Because
understand.
because they're on a multi-use path through the district.
Well, what the bike plan calls for on-street bike path in the Elmore extension, northern extension.
Okay.
I have a problem with this because it just seems to conflict with a lot of, well, it definitely conflicts with the project we approved, the Northern Access. It doesn't correspond to that, it doesn't seem like. Another question involves the district collector. Do I understand that what this means is that you're designating these streets as collectors, including Burgaw Street, Providence Drive, I don't understand the next part, Providence Drive at Lake Otis Parkway, and east of UAA Drive and UAA Drive? Are those all supposed to be collectors?
Through the chair, Mr. Spring, with the 2003 plan, yes, they were.
Well, this really conflicts with the official streets and highway plan. All these streets are designated minor arterials in the official streets and highways plan. All of them. I don't understand what Providence Drive at Lake Otis Parkway and east of UAA Drive means. That's not a segment, is it? Or what does that mean? Does that mean all of Providence Drive, or does that mean part of Providence Drive?
It looks like it's between east of UAA Drive to Lake Otis.
That'll be west of UA Drive to Lake Otis
Oh,
then.
yeah, I'm sorry.
I don't know. You're just asking for questions. So.
You know, your point is well taken. I think that if it's going to be guidance, it ought to be clear guidance. And I think that your point is well taken. Ms. Dean?
My question is of the chair. On these particular issue responses, quite a few staff has disagreed with our suggestions. How emphatic can we be to reinforce that we feel our position is correct, or modify and say, gee, we're okay with what staff has to say?
Yeah, I think, if I may, what our intent is ultimately is to go forward and have a motion to adopt the plan, and then there would be potentially subsequent amendments if, for example, you wanted to add these separate amendments into the plan. We could do that when we had a main motion on there. I think what we're doing right now is getting staff's read on what those issues were that we identified at the last meeting, understanding where they're coming from, so that when it comes time to deliberate, we can just go one by one. So it's totally within our purview to provide whatever amendments this body desires.
Okay, and there was one other one on page 2, just above, where we're talking about MOA private development had a suggestion which the city staff disagreed with, and I don't know if you and John had a chance to read that and see what your thoughts were.
Well, I think that issue is the same one we're taking up in a way.
That's what I thought too. I was just looking at it. Do we combine it, or?
I think what I would do, and then we'll kind of truck on, but I think that if you were to, for example, have a main motion that adopts this matrix, and you are specifically adopting things that staff has agreed with, then subsequently you'd have to add additional amendments that if they were things that staff disagreed with, or you'd have to identify, hey, adopt the whole thing whether or not staff agrees or disagree. I think it's easier to deal with one at a time on areas where there's disagreement, but that would be my suggestion. Okay, can we move on to, they're not exactly numbered, but I guess implementation item 51A. Delete the new staff position, unless we don't have questions on that one. Okay, next one. Revise all references to the Northern Access Road project to be consistent with PZC action taken on 10-5. Staff has disagreed with this notion.
I'm sorry, did you want me to talk about it?
I was hoping for your
Okay.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
could walk us through your.
So the reason why we disagreed with this, and I apologize, I wasn't at your October 5th meeting. I think the Planning and Zoning Commission did a great job of trying to keep elements in the Northern Access Road that would help it be a viable road for access into the UMed district. However, the community is looking at a roadway that is a complete roadway that was presented to the community by both DOT, MOA, Public Works, and by Dowell. And so in disagreeing with, not necessarily disagreeing with the idea of the approval of the road, just what the road needs to be built to. And we've been consistent all along that the presentation of the cross-section that Dowell gave to the community over the last year and a half is what the cross-section should be. And so that's why we disagreed with, essentially what was proposed there by Commissioner Ferguson.
Mr. Spring, then Mr. Kange.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you meant by let's see, what page is on page 46, describing the Northern Access Project. You said that listed a series of project elements, I guess, that you wanted to see addressed or included, including signal improvements at Northern Lights Boulevard. What would be the signal improvements? I'm not sure what that means exactly.
There's actually a cross-section in the plan here, and I'm trying to find the page that that's located on. And the cross-section is actually shown on page 21. If you take a look at that, it's figure 19 on page 21. And what we're trying to say with the plan, and this is what the UMed steering team as well as the public agreed with, that if the UMed road is going to be built, that it needs to be built to this cross-section standard. And like I said, I think the Planning and Zoning Commission did a great job of trying to deal with the budget and what was being presented to them on the 5th. But the bottom line is we were presented with this roadway that would be able to connect trails, provide bikes, and the connectivity that we need in the UMed district. And so to have some of this, some of those elements stripped out of this cross-section and not included in the project, we didn't feel it would serve the UMed as well as it could. So that's why we disagreed with that. We still would like it to say in the language that this is what the road needs to look like. What we're anticipating is if there's a phase 2 to the UMed, to the Northern Access Road, then that phase 2 would actually bring on those elements that were not able to be built right now.
Is that the only place where it's referenced on page 21?
No, it's referenced in text in a different part. I think it's chapter under Vision Element 4 under Transportation. And that was one of the comments that Barbara Carl had, that what we had in text didn't match what was on 21, and she asked that those things match up.
Yeah, that's why I cited the signal improvements, because I saw that in another section, and now I can't find it, of course.
Maybe to Mr. Springs' earlier point as well, that drawing talks about in-street bike lanes, which I believe we just talked about not being included in our other drawings. So we've got some issues.
Yeah, I agree.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you. Through the chair, this particular disagreement gives me the most rub, because we spent a considerable amount of time listening to public testimony and what I felt like was coming up with a decent compromise with regard to pedestrian access, bridges, and those sort of things, and to put all that to the side now and just go with what you've got here is, I think, does us a disservice. So again, I go back to all the public testimony that we received with regard to the Northern Access Road, and to change that, just because it's a funding issue, to me is kind of, what do we spend so much time going over all that stuff for then, if we're just going to toss half of it out? It's a rhetorical comment or question, but.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Kange, so what is missing from what your recommendation was in October is like the third roundabout and what else did you say? The third grade separation. Basically, you were consistent with most of the cross section that's included, and like I said, we don't disagree with the recommendation that you made on the 5th. We just would like to not change the plan. Our recommendation in the plan is to have this full cross section, so later on down the road, when DOT or the Muni gets more funding, the rest of the road can be built out. So that would give us the roundabout, et cetera, the things that are missing from basically the Phase 1 project. Because what we were asked to do was have the plan agree with what you proposed on, or approved on October 5th, and all we're saying is we'd like to keep the rest of the elements in there so that we can have a phase 2.
Thank you. I guess I would comment that I'm going to be left with is, given the inconsistencies, I'm not sure what this plan does in terms of recommending certain cross-sections. I think that's an issue that one way or the other needs to be reconciled. I think we'll get to it at some point. Not sure how we'll be able to resolve it here tonight. Looking at page 11, which is page 5 of the matrix, there are 2 additional comments on there. Either one of those do commissioners wish to bring up? One related to the ordering of the University Lake Master Plan. The other is fresh food. Anyone, any clarification needed of staff on those responses? Mr. Spring.
On page 11, related to fresh food references, I guess I don't understand, staff, what the food security research has to do with farmers markets. They're combined together in that recommendation, but I'm not sure what the connection is.
Well, there is research going on at both APU and UAA as far as food security goes, and one of the projects that they have as part of that food security research is they do bring a farmer's market to the UMed district. And so with the research that both of these universities are doing is they're, again, trying to, what we're trying to do with this goal is to support the future research, as well as should we have a UMed Village or whatever, they can provide that fresh food at the UMed Village. So it's that's the goal of that implementation item.
Tony.
Just one quick thing. You know, I agree. I think with. And I'm trying to go back, John, maybe you can tell us why you guys were wanting to delete that. Now, let me premise that by, I think in the implementation, 5.2, support food security research and projects that bring Alaska-grown food to UMed District. Great, I love it. But now we're saying we're going to support a small store, a farmer's market, co-ops, and community gardens, all of which I don't know if the market can sustain that. So when you're saying for us to support that, or through a small store, I don't know.
Through the chair, I'm not really dead set against that recommendation.
Yeah.
I just wanted some clarification about it. I believe Commissioner Dean was the one who brought it up originally. Maybe I supported her because she sounded like it was a good point, but is that true? I'm not sure. Was I the one that brought that up?
Ferguson, Commissioner Ferguson.
Oh, Commissioner Ferguson, sorry. Okay. He can't, yeah, see, I could blame it on him now because he's not here anymore.
Good with clarification. I just want to remind folks we've got about 10 more pages to get through, and then.
I was just trying to figure out what was our intent there. I just couldn't recall, but I'm good.
Okay. Anyone have any issues they'd like to raise related to the Resolve Design Guidelines with Title 21? Okay, moving on to page 14. Commissioner Spring, this was one of yours. Delete 2PK had to do with a park and ride option. You want to explore staff's response?
Sorry. Yes, I think I might have been off base on this one a bit when I criticized it. Maybe you could clarify it. Is this just intended to be build park and ride lots in the Mat-Su-Borough and outlying areas?
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Spring, we had that in there again, you know, trying to have projects that will look out into the future. So if we do get funding to do a TDM feasibility study, full-on TDM feasibility study for the UMed district, we wanted to recognize that we would probably need a park and ride lot out in the Mat-Su Valley area. So we wanted to show that that was important and that the folks on the steering team as well as the public thought that was an important thing to consider for that.
Okay, well, I apologize, because I jumped to the conclusion. I remembered a similar proposal talking about shuttle bus lots outside the UMed district, bringing folks in from parking lots into UMed. That's what I thought it was, so, okay.
Okay. I think the next several deal with the land use plan map. I think I have one that I'd like to start with that's, you know, kind of relevant holistically, and it really was driven home to me when I looked at the previous plan versus the current plan map I'm talking about. And the previous plan seemed like it was really trying to identify more micro areas within the institutions, and our current plan is simply a lot of blue. You've provided the master plans as just background, but we're not proposing that they be adopted in any way, but they actually give some definition to how this is going to be developed. So I wondered if you could just walk us through the rationale of why it feels like we're providing less direction and guidance than the previous plan.
Okay, so just to go over it a little bit, what is the difference? In the 2003 plan, they did amend that plan to indicate on the APU campus where some development would occur, and that's that copy of that plan that we included with you, with your packet. And then for the UMed district plan, for this update, we didn't show those areas, those master plan areas, number one, because UAA didn't bring their master plan, hasn't brought their master plan to us for assembly approval, and then APU was in the process of updating their master plan and hadn't been able to give that to us either. We did include copies of the master plan maps in the supporting documents. And what we could do is go ahead and include those master plan maps in the actual body of the UMed district plan. The things that we were more, I think one of the other things that was at play too was the situation of funding that we're in right now, as we're working through this plan with budget cuts and that kind of thing, how actual development would happen on APU or UAA in the next few years is going to be basically driven by the market. And so that's why we concentrated more like on what could be happening on Tudor and identifying what the UMed Village could look like and those kind of things. I guess we didn't realize that the connection between what the master planning is going to be doing and then what this land use plan map does, that there, you know, that connection would be lost by not including those master plans in the actual document.
No, that's the direction you've gone. I mean, I think the thing is, when I read the description of major institutional land use, I basically get large hospitals, university campuses, major public administration campuses, supportive uses such as food, lodging, student housing, group housing, or offices are allowed. Basically, if this, if you were designing this, all of those would be inherent land uses. I mean, and so you basically said, we had a previous plan that said the campuses will kind of work together. Now we've kind of said it's really going to be their own master plans that drive anything, and we're not going to distinguish any of those sub-uses within those their areas and try to coordinate it. I'll move on one way or the other, but it seems like we're doing less than we were before. I'll let it go. So if we could address the first issue. We didn't talk about off-leash dogs. Are we good with that? We'll deal with that, I guess, as it comes up. But changes the land use plan map along Tudor Road to commercial corridor from Lake Otis Parkway to Piper. Currently, all businesses along this stretch. You've agreed with one portion and disagreed with another. Could you please explain that?
Sure. We agree with going all the way to Wright Street because there are businesses all along there on that north side of the road. However, beyond Wright Street, there is a church just due east of there, and then due east of that church are vacant lots, and at this point in time, those are zoned R3, I believe, and so we didn't want to lose that R3 to commercial corridor potential for business at this point in time.
So does our map now reflect what you agree with?
Yes.
So the map on 23, basically, if I'm looking at is it the red portion there? In a box, in the black box, that's the portion that you've agreed with extending?
Yes.
Okay, and it's the portion between basically those two black boxes that you disagree with making full commercial?
Yes.
Okay, everyone clear on that? Okay. Request changes to Piper Street from Tudor to 40th Avenue on Providence owned property. I believe this was testimony from Providence. I'm having a hard time seeing where Piper is. Oh, there it is. So Piper is the dividing line between a lower intensity and a higher intensity residential area. That's where Piper is on our map.
Yes.
And the question, or I don't remember, what was the change to?
Well, Providence would like to upzone, so they own basically 3 large lots there along Piper. They own the large lot that's on Tudor, and then the one due north of that. And then you skip over, there's multi-use apartments, and then they own the large lot on the corner of Piper and 40th. At this point in time, we didn't feel comfortable with agreeing with that kind of an upzoning because we would lose a lot of residential zoned property at this point in time. What we have stated further on down in the comment response table is this, trying to figure out this idea of transfer development rights or something like that. We might be able to work through that at a later stage with the Planning and Zoning Commission and with Providence. But at this point in time, with the UMed district plan, we didn't recommend that that one be adopted.
Okay, Mr. Spring.
Yeah, it seems like this really boils down to is what is the demand for medical offices? I mean, obviously, Providence has some property there and wants to develop medical. He did a background study, right, on land uses and commercial land uses and housing needs. What did that study show regarding the need for medical offices?
Mr. Spring, through the chair, medical offices were found to be the highest and best use in that economic study. However, mixed use was also found to be affordable and could be something that could happen in the UMed district. And what we've done in our conversations with Providence with Andrew is ask him to consider some kind of mixed use development on these 3 lots so that they could have some housing and then some office space.
Through the chair. Yes, it seems like, medical is highest and best use, perhaps depending on what the comp plan says. I mean, that's part of the equation of highest and best use, and the comp plan says there should be residential to support the employment center. But there's like 60 acres or so of APU land, endowment land. We know that from APU that a lot of that is going to be, at least the priority parcels are going to be developed as probably medical. So there's a lot of land in APU available. Is that sufficient to meet the demand, or is, is there a shortage of land? Or do we know, really, in reality, if there is a shortage or not?
I don't believe that our study looked at APU. Their undeveloped property is to be primarily medical office, because from their APU master plan, we knew that they needed other campus supporting type of development on their campus. The problem with, saying that, well, we can put the medical on APU property, that, how does that support Providence's mission? And so that's why we were trying to suggest to them, how do we find a way to do some kind of mixed-use development on these 3 properties, as well as the other properties that Providence owns that are along Tudor there, and as you and I talked about, 40th Avenue.
Thank you.
Density transfers, do you want to get into that now?
Yes, if staff could explain some of the parameters that you've been thinking about in terms of TDMs or TDRs, sorry.
TDRs is a tool that is mentioned in 2020 plan, and as well as some of the other plans that have come through this body have also mentioned that as a tool to be developed. At this time, we do not have a TDR program in place. It is a complicated tool to develop, because not only do you have to have sending sites, but you need to have receiving sites, so that you make sure that the units that you're trying to be transferred are not lost in the books, but are actually developed. So that's why we are recommending that this issue be further looked at on a MOA-wide basis, because this is a tool that could have great use by the MOA, but at this point, we don't have anything developed.
Yeah, through the chair, I did, some just really superficial research in it, and it seems like TDRs are primarily used to transfer development rights from areas where you don't want development to areas where higher intensity development would be acceptable. For instance, agricultural land, conservation lands, wetlands, they're zoned for, let's say, it seems like housing occurs with housing quite a bit. Say they're zoned for high density housing, and the agricultural land, you think it's beautiful because you love farms and you don't want development out there, you want it closer to the transit routes, so you allow the trade to happen, right? I'm not sure how this is going to work here, because really the transfer that we're interested in is from residential to, receiving area is residential, and the giving area is commercial. So it's not housing to housing, it's one land use to another land use. And I didn't see any examples of that happening. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how that works. That's really, in reality, that's what we need. We need to be able to transfer commercial and residential rights. In this case, I would listen to a case or arguments that maybe Piper at the entrance of Providence might be a good spot for commercial.
Tudor or Providence?
Oh, so what?
At Piper at Tudor or Piper at Providence?
At Providence,
okay.
Between Tudor and Providence campus. That is an entrance there, and it's kind of contiguous to it. Might be better than the parcel in the strip mall, because that also might be okay. But that's not the entrance to the campus, but there is an access road. There's a need for housing that's described in this plan quite a bit, and in the economic analysis. Housing could be in a number of places, maybe over across Northern Lights Boulevard in the Mental Health Trust lands, which is zoned commercial. So that would, in fact, that would be an excellent place for housing. It's right on a bus line 45. There's going to be a new road coming through there. You'll be able to walk from that development across Northern Lights to the area. So that would be acceptable. So the only thing I could see is a trade between residential and commercial. I don't know how that works or whether it even can be done through TDR. That's, I don't know. So I just, rambling now, I guess. So.
So staff, your response is you would consider it as some sort of something to work on as an implementation item moving forward.
Yes, we agree with this, adding this implementation item, and we think it's something that, could be worked on as soon as the plan is adopted, put that into our work program, and, actually put together a team that could help us work through that, including the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay.
Because, like Carol said, we think it's needed in other places, and, it could be a really useful tool for us to have here.
Okay. The next one we touched on, there's two issues that I have here. One is, what would be your suggestion on how to deal with the organizational master plans and incorporate them? How would we do that here tonight? And the second one is, I'm still not convinced that like a B1A zoning district is really the appropriate zoning district to implement some sort of core village in the midst of uses that can be much more intense than that B1A.
Well, the other alternative commercial district would be B3.
Yeah. I mean, you're creating something that doesn't exist right now. It's a village. You've provided examples that are totally across the board, from urban universities to less urban universities, and the reality is you're going to craft something that's right, but I don't think you just grant it a B3, but I think you say it might need the intensity of B3 to work the right way. Just my comment. But if I could get an explanation on what you think we do with the master plans?
Well, we can, like I said, we can do one of, Mr. Chair, we can do one of two things. We can include the master plans in the body of the document instead of having them in the supporting documents. We can. They
would provide no regulatory framework. They would just be illustrative, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We could do something like they did with the 2003 plan and, change up, not have a solid blue, but then what the fear was from UAA and APU was if we do some blobs like we did back in 2003, does that force them to build within that blob, and what happens if they, come back at a later date and, which has happened now is they've got a new master plan which has a whole bunch more, blobs on it, and so we didn't want to confine them to not being able to basically update their master plans and grow as they needed to grow. The other thing is we did include at one point a blob in here for where the UMed Village could go, but they actually, the steering team actually asked us to take that off because at the point in time that we included that, they really weren't ready to consider where it could go, and they didn't want the land use plan map to force the UMed Village to be put in a certain area either. We just wanted the market to basically control where that would go.
Okay. I don't, my perspective is I don't want to tell UAA, APU, Providence exactly where to put everything, but I want to know that what they do has some sort of cohesive campus setting. That's the whole purpose of having a plan like this, is that it's different than Midtown, right? And that's what, but I'm not sure how this plan does that. I mean, it's just up, we heard from Mr. Davis that they're going to do the right thing, but that's fine. I mean, we just want to know how to support it with roads and other things that we as the public do, but also how to maintain this campus, because it's really important for our economy and for our kind of sense of place in this part of town.
Mr. Chair, that's one of the reasons why we felt like the design guidelines were really important to keep from the 2003 plan, because those design guidelines say, you know, we're going to have this cohesive, creative campus, that trails will connect, that pedestrian facilities will connect, that wetlands and natural areas will be preserved to the greatest extent possible. And what we did in incorporating with this plan is look to the Chester Creek Watershed Plan for, you know, they need to consider in their master plans what's included in Chester Creek when they're in their design aspect and things like that. So we really felt, and the steering team really felt, that the design guidelines were, you know, going to be able to continue to keep us cohesive and have the kind of campus that we want there.
Okay. Next one is TDM, Transportation Demand Management. I think, Ms. Dean, this was yours. Do you have any issue other than your previous view, but any clarification on staff's description?
I honestly don't even remember what the transportation demand management was. I can't even remember what page it was on in the book.
Okay.
And I have no reference at this point. I looked through the plan to try and see if I could even find what that was in reference to, and I can't. So I have absolutely no idea. If somebody has a clue for me.
No, I think it's just, it's recommended in the plan, and I think you had an issue of whether it ought to be recommended. So if you no longer are feeling that way, I think we just move right along.
No, I don't know if I do or not. I just don't remember what it was. It's just a phrase. It's not telling me where it is in the plan. So I don't remember. It's been a little while.
Well, I think it's a strategy. I don't know what page it's on, but it's a strategy that commits the use of transportation demand management as a way to deal with traffic and parking and everything else, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair, on page 47, that begins the discussion on what transportation demand management is. And then we also have case studies in the back of the document that Kittleson and Associates completed for us, and those case studies talk about 3 different areas that are similar to the UMed district where TDM could be implemented, and the case studies also recommend those kind of TDM items or elements that could be implemented in the UMed district. Again, we didn't have enough funding with this project to do a full-blown TDM study, and so that's why we wanted to include that as one of the implementation items. TDM has been proposed for the UMed district for years and years now, and the UMed steering team felt that was an important item to carry forward.
I do remember now what the issue was, is we already have a bicycle plan, a pedestrian plan. Why do we need a separate new plan just for this particular area? Why can't we have one plan that's cohesive for all of Anchorage and then just have this separate little plan that's just for UMed? I just think that plan after plan after plan after plan, I don't know if we could beat this area anymore with plans.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. I think we're going to move on and take these up one at a time, and you'll be able to weigh in. Let's try to get through them and then get to an actual action portion if we're ready for it. Mr. Spring, there was an issue of wanting to know where the zoning changes were related to the land use. Has that been resolved for you?
Yes, I've gone over it with staff, and I'm familiar now with it, and I'm comfortable now with the land use designations that they've recommended that could lead to zone changes, and I don't think there's a real conflict with that type of rezoning if it would occur.
Great. Thank you for that evaluation. The next one was mostly a comment by UAA. I think then we get to Mr. Davis's comments. I don't think any of those are asking for changes, correct?
Right. Correct.
The Airport Heights Community Council, is there something here that
We need to make the description the same as far as the Northern Access Road goes. However, if you do decide that you want the plan to include a description of the northern access road as what you adopted in October, then this would be a little bit different. What we would input into the plan would be different than what's here.
Okay. ULand LLC's comments, they were general, it seemed like. We had more comments from Providence talking about the density transfer, which we've already discussed. Is there something related to the Tudor Strip Center that we were being asked to change one way or the other?
No.
Okay. Boundary, Mr. Potter didn't like the boundary. Sorry, Mr. Potter. Thank you, Mr. Potter. And then the last issue, extension of commercial corridor, I think we've already discussed it. So, is there anything else, staff? You had mentioned that there was a couple other things you wanted to get into. Do you want to quickly go over those? We still got some work ahead of us here this evening.
Sure. Real quickly, we want to include an existing zoning map, and that will be included in the introduction chapter.
Where you say that'll be included, but what part of our action includes the zoning map?
Well, basically, you had asked.
No, I know, but as part of our action here tonight, are you saying we would explicitly ask that we include a zoning map, or you're just going to put them in whether we ask for it or not, which is fine. I just want to make sure we capture what I think we'd talk about.
We would ask that you include, as in the list of amendments, to include a existing zoning map to follow on page 47 of the plan.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes. I just wanted to clarify that on different, we had a lot of implementation items in this plan. I mean, we had like the kitchen sink of implementation items. And before we brought this plan forward as a public hearing draft, we went through and scrubbed a lot of implementation items out. And those became what we're calling considerations. So like if you look on page 34 or page 38, we talk about like on 38, a conceptual plan for the UMed Village, and there's a bulleted list of considerations there. Those considerations are not meant to be implementation items, and we just wanted to clarify that. And because of that kitchen sink situation and all of those implementation items being in the table, a couple of them got left in the table that really shouldn't be in there, so we want to have the leeway to reconcile the text with the table and remove any implementation items in the table that are actually considerations.
But you don't have that updated table for us to look at here today, or know which ones explicitly come off the list?
Well, I think the off-leash dogs was in the implementation table, and we want to take it out of there. That's the one that specifically comes to mind. And then there were a couple of implementation items that were not numbered correctly.
Commission feel comfortable with an amendment that would say something to the effect that we acknowledge staff's going to scrub the implementation table?
Okay, great. And then the one more thing, we would, excuse me.
I would say not scrub, but to reconcile the text of the main document with the implementation tables.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last thing was we would like to submit University Lake Drive to be classified as a collector in the official streets and highway plan. And on the on the map, it's not shown as making a complete loop to where the Northern Access Project would be. And what we want to do is amend the map, the transportation projects map, and have that be a complete loop. So we would like a recommendation that University Lake Drive be classified as a collector.
Where would this loop go?
Well, it would meet up with the Northern Access.
Where? It's a real, like, little change, but that's a pretty big issue.
Well, on page 51, the transportation projects map, it's the red line is basically a concept line. It does partially follow University Lake Drive now. So what we would do right now, it kind of terminates where I believe that's the Atwood Center is. We would basically just connect that red line over to somewhere over to the middle. And we can work with APU on that, where that should actually be.
It seems like based on the plan, Northern Access plan that we saw, it would be fit pretty well with the proposed access to UAA at the Fine Arts Building, more or less in that area. So it'd be like a four-way intersection there.
Like at the Northern Lights alignment?
It would be about midway through the green area there. So where the UAA parking lot is on the left side, the red line would maybe come in where that little dog leg is or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea. It's just an odd one to throw in at this point in the planning process. I mean, is it?
I'll have to take the burden of that one. I think it's my recommendation that be put in based on primarily the concept plan that we saw from APU. If they're going to develop anywhere like they plan to do, they're going to need. They propose an access to the Northern Access. It has to be. You can't have a dead-end street with that much development on it, and expect it to work. It's got to be a loop, more or less, connecting Burgass Street with the Northern Access, or as they proposed in the APU plan. I think if we designate it as a concept or as a generalized route, that might work. I don't think anything we put on a map is intended to be set in stone, but it would help, I think, for planning purposes to show this connection. And as a collector, they may or may not be able to get some public funding for it. It's happened before. That's the primary reason to put it in, to show that this is part of the plan and it's needed as part of the circulation.
Okay.
In this area.
You just are responsible for the second Northern Access project. We'll blame you. You can argue that as it comes up. So I think, have we gotten through all of the issues on your list?
Yes.
So I'd like to poll the commission members. We have a plan in front of us. It's 9:30. My recommendation is we try to get through this in about an hour's time, if at all possible, that we limit debate on each particular amendment. Given that we've just flushed some things out, is everybody game, and do you need 5 minutes before we start doing that? All right, five minutes, and then we're going to start with a positive motion, I think, to adopt the plan. And then, okay, one more attempt. We are in session. I believe we have a motion coming from Mr. Kange.
Thank you. In regard to case 2015-0036, I move that we recommend approval of the UMed District Plan public hearing draft of October 2015 as Exhibit A, the comment response table with the items that staff agreed with as Exhibit B, and the UMed District Plan update land use plan map and land use descriptions dated October 28, 2015 as Exhibit C. Additionally, I would recommend that the department adds a zoning map. And I welcome up any amendments after I receive a second.
It's the main motion on the floor. Can we get a second, please? Mr. Spring has seconded. Do either of you wish to speak to the main motion, or I believe, as we suggested, that there may be items that staff disagreed with that maybe the commission feels differently that would be offered as individual amendments?
That would be my suggestion, Mr. Chair, if we can go through the items that we aren't in agreement on and provide some sort of amendment or put whatever to a vote. I think we would get through this a little bit quicker.
That would be fine. Just my suggestion would be just bring up the issue only if you must. Not if you don't. If you feel it's fine the way it is, then we don't need to discuss it. Mr. Spring.
I have amendment number 1 motion on page 9. Move to delete street design standards shown on page 46 and implementation item number 4.6A on page 80.
So basically, as written in the.
Yeah, it's based on, I don't know about based on comments received from MOA private development, but.
Okay. Is there a second so Mr. Spring can speak to his motion? Ms. Dean has seconded. Mr. Spring?
Okay. Well, I think I discussed this before when we were going over these items. But I don't disagree with the idea of having street standard section on a plan. It's just that I just don't know how to fix this one. I just don't know what to do with it. There's just too many problems with district classifications. You know, everything's listed as a district collector, and it conflicts with the official streets and highways plan. The illustrations are not detailed enough. They don't show bike lanes. They don't show, I don't know if there's separation of the curbs. There's language problems related to the integrated campus and both scenarios, which no longer exist in this version of the plan. So if I had a way to fix it, it would take too long to fix it, I think, and I can't do it. So,
Ms. Dean? Do you have any comments?
Yes, I do, actually. My comment is regarding page 46. Mine actually go all the way back to page 42 through 46. All of the design guidelines are already covered in the new Title 21. And essentially, we're writing new, separate design guidelines for that. I know, John, you were looking at page 46, which the roads, I'm looking at all of the design standards also, which also was MOA private development wanted to look at also.
So if I may, to clarify, Mr. Spring, could you clarify, is your motion just about the illustrations on page 46?
yes, that was.
Okay. So does your motion, does your second still stand, Ms. Dean? If that's not what your intent is, that's what the motion is on the table. You're able to offer an additional motion, but it sounds like this motion has only to do with the illustrations on page 46.
I have no problem being a second to this.
Okay.
My motion then would be separate for dealing with the MOA private development design standard issue.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can we repeat the motion is just to delete figure 38 on page 46, because there's some additional language with regard to the implementation item on page 80.
That's correct, the figure 38.
Just, okay. Call for the question.
Please vote. The motion passes. Are there additional amendments? Mr. Kange.
Thank you. I would move to delete item 5.1A, new staff position proposed with this plan.
And that's seconded by Mr. Spring. Would you like to speak to that motion?
Thank you. I just didn't see, I wasn't convinced with staff's response that I felt that this needed a whole separate position to assist the steering team, so I don't support this motion.
Additional discussion? Not, please vote. That motion passes. We'll call that, just to keep track here, amendment number 2. Mr. Spring.
Yes, I'd like to address the comment on bottom of page 10. Trying to formulate I'm not, mind me if I just ramble a little bit. I'm not sure whether to be specific and change the actual wording or to instruct the staff to make the changes to be consistent. But
My personal recommendation is not to sweat the wordsmithing, but to be very clear on your intent and to trust that staff will make that happen.
I'll make the motion and then elaborate on the intent and maybe specifying some of the issues.
Okay.
Okay. So my motion is to revise all references to the Northern Access Road project to be consistent with the action taken by the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 5th. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, that is made and seconded by Ms. Dean.
Yeah, there's a couple things. The list is not too inconsistent. They incorporate a lot of the elements that we recommended. One of the problems I have is the multiple roundabouts. That's I would, if they had proposed that on the Northern Access Plan and a lot of roundabouts, I probably would not have recommended that or voted for it. I would have asked for deletion of the roundabout because I don't think it's appropriate for a minor arterial street that's supposed to carry traffic, in and out of the area, and let's face it, also through the area too. My idea is that the roundabouts, I could go on, but the roundabouts should not impede traffic. You should try to get as much traffic on the Northern Access instead of the UAA Drive, because UAA Drive cuts right through the campus, and this goes on the periphery of the UAA campus. So, also, they did not address the crosswalk improvements in Northern Lights. I think they mentioned signal improvements. I don't know what that means, but I think the issue is more related to crosswalk improvements there. There's already a signal there, so that's not an issue, I don't think. And the two-lane striped, two lanes, travel lanes, specifying how many travel lanes there should be there, I think, assumes that they've done some transportation demand modeling, and they could show us that there only is 2 lanes needed. This was not done based on transportation modeling, and I suspect that someday they might need 4 lanes, and in fact, they're designing it to maybe accommodate 4 lanes someday. So I don't think that 2 lanes should be in there. I think it should be neutral about the lanes, if anything.
Ms. Dean, any comments?
I agree.
No, I hear you. Can we vote, please? Motion fails. Next. Oh, Ms. Dean.
Going back to page 8, the MOA private development. Their statement was UMed district design guidelines are not specific with labels and dimensions, do not meet the current code. So my theory was to throw out all of the pages from 42 to 46, since we already have design standards in Title 21. If we create a whole nother set of design standards for just the UMed district, we've added a whole nother layer of difficulty in developing anything in the UMed district. It's just going to make it harder and harder, and a whole new level of bureaucracy.
Okay, the motion is to, which would be amendment number 3, would be to amend the, to basically delete all district design guidelines in the plan. Is there a specific page reference there, or just the section?
Pages 42 through 46.
42 to 46. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Spring. Would you like to speak to that?
Well, yeah, I guess I'd like a little clarification, because I don't know Title 21 design standards as well as you guys do. So I don't know where the conflict is exactly. I know there's multifamily design standards, correct? Are there other design standards that would conflict with this? Because this is mostly institutional design standards. I don't know.
There is design standards for commercial, and is it necessary to add a separate set of design standards that doesn't apply to the rest of the city and only applies to this one area? I just think it's confusing.
Could I please, I'd like to recognize Ms. Bunnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are not creating new design guidelines. These design guidelines have been for the district plan, for the UMed district since 2003, and we had no design guidelines whatsoever until the new Title 21 to help direct development in the UMed district, and current planning staff relies heavily on these design guidelines, as well as the developers within the UMed district. They've been working we'd like to remain consistent with the district. When you do have a district or neighborhood plan, you do have the option to have your own design guidelines. And like I said, they've been working for 12 years now, and to just do away with them would kind of interfere with what's been happening in that district.
Thank you, Ms. Bunnell. Any other discussion? Please vote. That motion fails. That was amendment number 4. Mr. Gange.
Thank you. Amendment number 5, reorder plan priorities, making University Lake. I move, well, although this one was something that we had disagreed with, I think the intent was something different than what we talked about. So I would like to move that we don't reorder the plan priorities to make University Lake Master Plan priority number 7. And I'll speak to that motion.
Okay. So status quo.
Correct.
Okay. Could I have? So is the motion really any change to what we currently have on the table?
Well, the main motion implemented items that we agree with staff on, and this one we disagree, and so I'm making the motion that we leave it as status quo basically, and not reorder.
Okay.
So leaving that as item number 1.
So if you were silent on it, would we be in the same place? Or do we need to go through every? You know what I mean?
I guess my only concern, if we're silent on it, doesn't take into account the main motion when I stated that we have to agree on it to make the recommendation.
Okay, I'm fine. It just means that we'd have to go through them all.
I mean, I hate to go through all of them, but
That's correct, because your main motion was on the agreed items, and here we had disagreement.
yeah.
I'll agree to be confused, but I understand the motion is that we not reorder plan priorities to make University Lake Master Plan priority number 7. So if we vote this down, first of all, I need a second. can I ask clarification from somebody that if we vote it down, what happens?
My understanding is that it stays in the same order that it is now.
Right? And if you vote for it, there's no difference.
Yeah, I think the way you had it, the process set up was that we shouldn't be voting on this because we agree with staff who disagrees with this. So, in other words, we shouldn't be changing, we shouldn't be making a motion on this, right?
That was my view. Ms. Wong had a different interpretation. Can you try one more time? My belief is that we agreed with things that staff agreed with. If we just ignore this, the plan has an order. It already has an order.
Yeah, I think you're right, Tyler.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I convince you to withdraw your motion? Thank
Sorry,
you.
I would just.
No, it's getting late. Is there an amendment number 5? I don't have anything going on here. I got one that would be Mr. Spring.
I'd like to move to delete 2PK implementation item 4.5B, park and ride option to support TDM.
Need a second. That's been seconded by Ms. Dean.
Yeah, I think I am getting a little picky here, but in reality, the city can't do anything about park and rides out in Matsu Borough. We aren't going to be implementing anything out there. It's up to Matsu Borough to do it or DOT. So we could support that, I suppose, but we can't do anything about it. And, you know, the park and rides along the Glen Highway aren't, in my opinion, aren't used a whole lot, and it's not a real good investment in your money. And it's really a citywide issue anyway. If you want to have park and ride program, you do a citywide, you put it in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It doesn't just serve the UMed district. In fact, I don't think it would have any effect whatsoever on the number of cars going in and out of UMed district if you expanded the park and ride out in the Matsu Borough. But
Thank you. Mr. Spring, to be clear, this does not eliminate all TDM recommendations from the plan, correct? This is specific to 2PK.
Yes.
Which is a label on a map.
Yes.
Okay. That's been, could we please vote? Motion passes. Anyone for the dogs? Ms. Dean.
I move to delete the phrase prohibit off-leash dogs at University Lakes and Goose Lake parks. The reason being those are University Lake is already a dog park. We can't suddenly make it not a dog park and without some proper process. And sticking it into the plan would make it forever in concrete that couldn't change.
It's been seconded by Mr. Spring. I have a question of staff. It's a rather blunt statement. Is there anything in the plan, given that it was such a issue of a topic of conversation, that still ensures that at least the issue will be looked at, dealt with, presumably through the master plan process?
We are hoping that the master planning process deals with it. I have to tell you, though, that there were several organizations that were adamant that off-leash dogs be either controlled or taken out of this park because they're out of control and they are continuously going on organizational property causing issues, and we would have a couple of organizations, or actually 3 or 4, that would be very disappointed if this was deleted out of there. And the UMed steering team, again, this is one of the very loud issues that we heard in our public meetings, and while we did get about 5 emails that said we think off-leash dogs need to stay at University Lake Park, there was a lion's share of many, many more comments that said the dogs need to go.
Great. Mr. Spring.
I mean, I agree with this. As I experience the conflict all the time, and I've heard people describe the conflict, especially along the multi-use path. But I agree with Commissioner Dean. I don't think it's going to be it's not effective to just go out and state something like this without going through a master planning process. It's an issue. It should be addressed in the master plan. Maybe there's a place where they could be put that would not conflict with other users. Maybe it's something, a solution to the problem that we don't know about. So prohibiting it doesn't make sense.
Ms. Dean?
It should be a Parks and Rec issue. It shouldn't be part of the plan. It should be over in Parks and Rec, since they control those properties.
Well, Ms. Dean, I appreciate your point, but I think it's an issue because it affects properties more than just in Parks and Rec, and that's the point.
I understand. Oh, I do like the idea of going with a master plan for the park, which it is mentioned.
Ms. Bunnell?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Mr. Chair, could we just add consider to that line there instead of deleting that language altogether?
That would be up to the maker of the motion, which is Ms. Dean. I would simply add that I'm unwilling to delete it completely without adding something in there, given how significant an issue that it has been. So,
And I believe prohibit would be a good word to add. I'm sorry, not prohibit, consider prohibiting. Yes, adding consider to that phrase would be just fine with me. I think that's a good idea. It doesn't close the door, but it leaves it open too at the same time.
okay, Secretary, are you okay with the fact that we have an amendment to this motion number 6 that now states consider prohibiting off-leash dogs at University Lake and Goose Lake parks? Got that? And the second is okay. Please vote. That's approved. We are in the area of the land use plan map, and I just from what we have as a main motion is since we said to agree with staff where we agree, then the change listed under number 1 of the land use plan map is the one that we're moving forward right now. Clear? So there is that one change associated with that issue if we do nothing. Mr. Springer, are you still in the queue from before?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
No.
So that's just to clarify. Anything there? Anything on Piper Street and 40th Avenue? Anything on density transfers? I believe it's not clear that, staff has per se agreed with this, but it's a little bit nebulous. But effectively, what they have said is that they would agree to look at something. Mr. Spring, you have a motion.
I guess I'd like to make one exception to the rule that agree. I think it needs clarification.
Agreed.
Okay. So I do have a motion, yes. Add a new implementation item, implementation item 7.1b. The municipality of Anchorage should develop a TDR ordinance, that's Transfer of Development Rights Ordinance, to allow transfer of development rights from TDM, that maintain the same amount or more of residential development potential within or adjacent to the UMed employment district.
Great, thank you.
Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. My notes are really screwed up. Can I repeat that again?
Yes, please.
And tell me if it's just too long and too complex here. The municipality of Anchorage should develop a TDR ordinance to allow transfer of development rights from existing commercial zone land to existing residentially zoned land in order to facilitate the appropriate employment growth in the UMed district. And then I have a second sentence here. The same amount or more of residential development potential within or adjacent to the UMed Employment Center shall be maintained through these transfers. A little too complex?
I think if you could help our secretary make sure she captures it accurately, but I understand the intent of it.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions? And I guess we need a second on that to discuss this this amendment. That motion is seconded by Mr. Kange.
If I could clarify, maybe it would help a little bit. I agree with I think that I'm convinced that we don't really know what the demand is for medical offices in the UMed district, and we may be in danger of not providing enough land available for that development. So, and also it might be appropriate to just transfer the rights in one commercial area to another area which is zoned residential. In this case, we suspect that that'll be along Piper Street. And what I don't like about that is that I think if we allow the transfer to occur anywhere within the city, like I think I've heard proposed in the Midtown, then I think that violates the comprehensive plan, which is very clear in that it states that there shall be supporting residential development adjacent to employment areas. And that just doesn't mean some employment areas. It means all employment areas. So I like the transfer of development rights, but I think it should be focused in the area where you're taking the residential away. And that's why I had the second sentence there. So you have a balance. You still have a balance between, or try to achieve a balance between housing and employment, which the comp plan clearly intended.
I think you had me until we started talking about, individual like house for house, or I just think that's hard to control. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on your intent.
Well, maybe I don't need that to be that specific, because in reality it's going to be I don't think it has to be the same amount. I don't have to specify the same amount or more, perhaps, but there'll be an ordinance that'll have to be developed and we'll have to review it, so we could review it then without being that specific, if that's your objection.
Just because this plan is, I don't think that's the appropriate spot to get into that, and I agree with you. If it comes up, it would be in the form of some ordinance, and I just don't want to belabor the plan with. How do you quantify that once you say it in the plan? Is the hard.
So the whole second sentence would be out.
I think you had me at the first part and lost me with. Just my 2 cents, John. But I mean, I understand your intent.
Yeah.
I just think it'd be hard to quantify if we put that in the plan.
Okay. I would accept that as an amendment, a friendly amendment.
So what is the main motion?
The main motion,
Or this amendment?
everything but the last sentence, which reads, add a new implementation item 7.1B. The municipality of Anchorage shall develop a transfer of development right ordinance to allow transfer of development rights from existing commercially zoned land to existing residentially zoned land in order to facilitate appropriate employment growth in the UMED district.
Okay. Still second? Please vote. Ms. Bunnell?
I don't think that quite works.
The properties that Providence currently has before you in question is zoned R3 and designated residential. And so your motion to transfer from commercial to housing precludes that. You're assuming that they're going to get a rezone to commercial first. Is it the desire that as part of that rezone review that they could offer to transfer those housing densities elsewhere?
If I may, through the chair, I think the concept that I've tried to lay out, which would be that in order for a transfer to take place, you'd have to take the rights from a commercially zoned parcel of land and transfer that commercial development right to the residentially zoned land. So you no longer you still have a balance. You no longer have commercial rights on the property. You would have to develop as multifamily or residential, and then the receiving parcel would have the right to develop not residential but commercial.
Could we have a simpler yet, I mean, we're getting into the weeds here and we don't need to be. I really would prefer an amendment that says, you know, consider implementations of a transfer development right program that looks at reallocation of development or with development opportunities within the district, or something real basic. Basically, it's all going to be flushed out later, but the intent is Providence moves forward, we don't lose all the residential land.
I'm okay. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know which direction it's going to take. I was trying to lay out what I thought the premise of the problem was, but it may be beyond that. It may be more of an expanded set of problems than I realized. So we should make it. I agree. I'll go with that. Make it more global, and just say the municipality of Anchorage shall develop a transfer development right ordinance to facilitate appropriate employment growth and development in the UMED district.
Good. I'm going to say this, Lori, that's the one you listen to when you listen to the tape, that last one right there. That is the motion. It had previously been seconded, I believe, by Mr. Kange. Is that still good? Please vote. That motion fails. Could have saved us all the pain and agony, Stacy. Are you asking for something, Ms. Bunnell? Oh, you're still okay. That's okay. Mr. Spring.
It failed, but I think, you know, the planning department still has an idea that maybe, you know, this might be time to explore that type of thing. So, and it's not just a UMED district issue, so it's citywide. So if it's not on this plan, the planning department, if they think it's a good idea, which I think they do, they'll probably end up pursuing it. So.
Okay. Ms. Dean.
John, I agree with your idea. I think it needs to be citywide, especially if you're Providence. You may want to not necessarily deal with the property right there, but maybe with an exchange on the other side of town or something. So by making it just within the UMAT, it makes it a little more tougher than if it isn't citywide. That was the only reason why I thought it was just a little cumbersome to just keep it narrowed down to just that one neighborhood.
Okay, we have agreed to include the institutional master plans. I think it's already as part of the main motion, but I think the point of this plan, in my mind, is not that those institutions be tied to those plans, but the point is to share what their plans are so there can be compatible development and appropriate planning. And that's, I think, why we're there. Anybody have a comment on B1A zoning as a limitation for the village? Mr. Kange?
Thank you. I would move not to limit the B1A zoning.
Okay. The amendment number 8 is to not limit the implementation to B1A zoning for the UMed Village. It's seconded by Ms. Dean.
Again, I think the market should drive that and not the particular plan in this case, because if it's too small on compact sites or other issues listed in the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Kange. I think the issue to me, I'll be supporting that amendment, is that B1A is rather limiting 30-foot maximum. There's quite a lot of development within the UMed area that already exceeds those heights. It just seems appropriate to look at scale that matches the different areas. Please vote. That motion passes. We would be up for a number 9. Ms. Dean.
Number 9 then would be the one that I put forth, which was why is the TDM included in the recommendation? And that would be to remove the TDM recommendation. Commissioner Spring and I had discussed it some. Commissioner Spring, could you speak your mind on that one?
We need, okay, there's a second. Mr. Spring.
Well, okay. Well, the UMed district has TDM programs already. UA has a very strong TDM program. I don't know about Providence, but I suspect they have some type of carpool. APU probably is pretty small. Usually what happens in these cases when you have big institutions kind of clustered together and a big employment center, sometimes you get an overarching type of transportation demand management program. So what they'll do is they'll go together and they'll hire somebody to be the TDM manager, and they'll try to coordinate everybody, not only UAA, but APU and Providence, into a carpool program, and they'll really promote it and work on it. And they'll be funded by the institutions, typically, is what happens. Although I think they're suggesting that they go through AMATs and get some money. I can't tell you what the status of their TDA program is right now in that area, but it wouldn't hurt to do that. But it's not very specific in the wording. If they mean to go and do a overarching TDM program with the TDM manager that can coordinate the TDM program, that would probably be a good idea, and I would support it. But it's not very clear exactly.
Mr. Spring, do you intend to support the
what
amendment?
Does it sound like? I don't think I'm going to be supporting it. I think it's probably it would be a good thing for the district to have a TDM management program with the coordinator hired to give more juice to the existing programs.
Then I'll withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. I can't make a motion, but I agree that the area outside of these hard boundaries ought to be contemplated for future updates to the UMED plan, whether it's south of Tudor, west of Lake Otis, up north along Bragaw. So if someone would like to put a motion forward that says future updates to this plan will grow the plan boundary, that'd be great. Mr. Spring.
Yes, I move that there's not agreement or disagreement, so I'm not sure. I move that the next iteration of the UMED district plan consider areas outside the existing boundaries, particularly in the area which might be redeveloped to support housing and promotional activities of the UMED district.
Thank you, Mr. Spring. That's seconded by Mr. Kange. Any discussion? Please vote. That passes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and someone else can tell me, there was a desire by staff to reconcile the implementation table. Can't remember the language exactly, but related to those items that were simply suggested or that could be considered. They said that there are implementation items that said the following may be considered as the organizations complete and implement their master plans, and then some of those ended up in the implementation table and they wanted to remove them. If we don't want to do anything with it, that's fine. Hearing and seeing nothing but tired, confused faces, we'll let that go. Mr. Spring, University Lake Drive collector, I think that's the last one on my list, and hopefully up for some discussion.
Yes, I'd like to move that the University Lake Drive be as designated on the, no, I don't have the map number.
51.
Map on page 51 show the, which is designated by a red line, show a continuous loop connecting Bragaw to Northern Light, a northern access connection.
Did you want to reference the APU map?
Oh, sorry, yes. That's on 51? No.
No, that's page.
It's page 37 in your packet.
Okay. Yes, all right. I'll revise my motion if I could, maybe.
Let's try that again, and I'm sure you're making
That
lots of
the University Lake extension shown on the map on page 51 be revised to reflect the APU endowment land concept plan map. Is that what it's called, Carol?
It's their master plan, right?
Master plan map?
Campus Endowment Properties Master Plan.
Map, which shows the connection of University Lake Drive to the Northern Access extension.
Can you repeat your motion?
I'm not doing very good, am I? It pays to write these things down before you.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Let me just explain first before I get my motion so I can get my thoughts in order. What I'm trying to do is make sure that there's a not a dead end road, and that it's a continuous loop that serves the development plans of APU.
Okay.
And it's going to connect eventually to as it shows on the map of the APU master plan, to the new Northern Lights extension. So it's a continuous loop.
Thank you. That is a motion in there somewhere. That is seconded by Ms.
If you
Dean.
could say it like
I agree. I will say that it's currently shown it is a loop road. So
Yeah, but it just connects to the, inappropriately for a loop through the APU campus. And it takes the road, the traffic right back through the campus, so it needs to go all the way to connect to Northern Access.
So you just want to continue the horseshoe
See, this is
to
go-
be one
this
complete
is-
half circle, right?
Yes.
APU's shown the road on their master plan. Is there any harm in showing it in the district plan? We're not talking collectors.
And, yes, and I'm going to withhold my comment regarding the classification.
Okay,
But-
please vote. I believe the motion is to show the road as it's currently drawn to connect to campus, but also connecting over to Braga. That is approved.
So I could
That's number 11.
another finding on that. I didn't.
Yes, please.
I didn't want to make a reference to the classification, but I believe that when the transportation plan is updated, that they should probably look at it for the appropriate classification. And it's probably not within our abilities right now to make that decision, but it's obviously going to have a lot of traffic. And these new development areas, you need to plan ahead, and you need to have an idea of what kind of facility you need when you start developing it. Otherwise, you get yourself in a box. So, I don't know. Makes sense to do some planning here.
Thank you for those findings. Mr. Kange.
I have none other than the fact that it brings some consistency between the APU plan and the UMed draft, whatever plan, district plan, whatever we're calling this plan.
The APU master plan, but it does have a different title. Thank you. Ms. Bunnell?
Yes, Mr. Chair, you just mentioned that the APU road would connect to Braga, and I just want to make sure that in the notes, what you really meant was the Northern Access Road.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Bunnell. Are there any additional amendments to the main motion? Hearing none, the main motion is before you. It's not on my... So the main motion was by Mr. Kange. There it is, seconded by Mr. Spring. I'll ask Mr. Spring to repeat the no, I'm just kidding. Is everybody ready and prepared to vote? Are you aware of what you are voting on? Are you really going to do? Please vote. The UMed District Plan is approved. Thank you, and thank you all who suffered through that for listening through that process, but I commend the commissioners for getting through it. That recommendation will be forwarded to the Assembly. I think it's important for us to see the resolution before it goes there, and I'd be open to some findings, some broader findings on that action. Mr. Spring.
Yeah, I think I'd find that the UMed district plan is compatible with the comprehensive plan that was adopted by the municipality of Anchorage. It serves to reinforce the notion that this is an important employment center, and the fact that it also includes redevelopment area, which is intended to provide housing and residential support to that employment center. and that the public process seemed to be thorough and engaged all the institutions in the area, which seemed to approve the plan as adopted. So, good job.
Mr. Kange.
Thank you. I'd like to add that the adoption of this plan will maintain and improve the characteristics that make this area such an enjoyable place to live, work, and play. And I'd like to say that the steering team had a lot of input into the decisions that were made here, not only to the draft plan, but the whole process of this plan. I'd like to thank them and staff and all those that were involved. I think this is a good product, and I think we've moved the bar pretty far by getting this thing through at least this step, and whatever the Assembly does with it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Kange, and I'll just echo, I appreciate staff's work through this process, and I acknowledge that as growth will continue in the area, things will change. That's sometimes difficult for members of the community, but this plan tries to outline responsible ways that the things that are important to people and landowners and the broader Anchorage community are maintained.
Move to adjourn.
Ms. Dean, if I think she asked for a couple of minutes, and we'll grant you those, given that you're senior here on this body. So the floor is yours.
What I just wanted to bring up is the fact that the DOT has destroyed quite a bit of housing in Anchorage. And to give you an idea, the Sourdough Motel was torn down last year, and that was 13 housing units that we lost. That was all low-income housing. On Arctic Boulevard at Tudor, they tore down 16 trailers to widen Tudor, which is a nebulous project if that's ever really going to happen, or is really necessary. 92nd, between Old and New Seward, they've torn down 9 houses or trailers on lots, but nine housing units are gone. They're getting ready to tear out a minimum of 19 trailers on Academy Drive between New Seward and towards Abbott there. Very possibly 25 trailers could actually go away. Again, these are all people that, they've bought everything that they could afford. That's it. And we're taking that away from them. Replacing that, being able to find something that's in their affordability range is going to be very difficult. But to give you an idea of how many housing units that we permitted in 2014, we only permitted 523 housing units. That's including duplexes and apartments. This year, we are only going to permit, so far, through October, 365 housing units. And to see so many residential units being torn down in 2 years is pretty sad. I am probably missing a couple of other road projects, but as we continue to jump up and down and get excited about affordable housing, we're really cutting off a lot of our own affordable housing. Some of these road projects, I'm not so convinced that putting the bridge in across the inlet is really ever going to happen, but we tore down the hotel anyway. So that's just my beef right now. I think DOT is not really getting any input from the city of Anchorage that our housing is very important to us, and we need to retain what we have and not have 10% of it go away in 2 years that we've built.
Thank you, Ms. Dean. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. All right. This meeting is adjourned.